Christmas at the Sleigh Café by Melinda Curtis. Prologue. I used to love Christmas. I used to love Christmas and Christmas Mountain, Montana. I used to love tinsel, hot chocolate, and presents too pretty to unwrap. But somehow between the age of 6 and 16, I discovered I loved dancing more than anything else. Dancing took me away from my hometown and year-round Christmas. It took me to summers at an amusement park where I danced every 2 hours in a parade in front of the float carrying a famous mouse. It took me to an academy for performing arts in New York City where I was taught to bring my A game and a professional attitude with my dance shoes. It took me to Broadway and Rockefeller Center where I brought high kicks and high energy to every performance. And Christmas? It became just another show. And now, with a nearly healed bone fracture in my foot and my last paying gig on Broadway shuttered due to bad reviews, dancing was nowhere to be found. Nor were funds in my bank account. But Christmas. The bus pulled into the station at Christmas Mountain. Christmas was everywhere. Chapter 1. Is that the famous dancer Allie Jameson? I stopped wrestling my very large, wheeled bag onto the snow-covered sidewalk outside the Christmas Mountain, Montana, bus terminal and looked up, torn between joy at being recognized and guilt over not being truly famous. A man walked toward me. A handsome man. Before I knew what hit me, this large, handsome male specimen wrapped his strong arms around me and swung me around, laughing in deep, joyful waves. I knew that laugh. My hugger was Nick Stocking, my best friend when I'd lived in Christmas Mountain, a friend I hadn't seen or talked to in years, other than on social media. My bad. It is you. It's Allie Jameson, the dancer who took New York by storm. Nick set me down and held me at arm's length, smiling. His brown eyes glowed with affection. How could I have let such a good friendship slide? And are you? I peered at his endearing mug, happily playing along. Are you Nicholas Stocking, world-traveling master chef? I grinned, drinking him in like the love-starved person I'd suddenly become, craving connection more than a comfortable bank balance. Nick looked good. I hadn't seen him in what felt like forever. No longer a scrawny teen, he'd grown to be a fine physical example of man, from his broad, muscular shoulders to his sturdy grip on my arms to his clean-shaven, square jaw. His dark hair peeked from beneath the brim of a blue knit cap. And he smelled like... I leaned forward, drawing a deep breath from his bright red, ugly holiday sweater, featuring a hand-stitched heat miser from the year without a Santa Claus. I didn't care what he wore. Nick smelled of sugar and cinnamon, of holidays and home, of real Christmas celebrations rather than the glimmer and shine of Broadway. I glanced up at him, reacquainting myself with features that were both familiar and new. You stopped baking apple pies to take a leisurely stroll past the bus station? Pumpkin, not apple. And they're tarts. Nick gathered my things, backpack, sports duffel, oversized red suitcase. And yeah. I just happened to be walking on this end of town at the exact time the bus from New York pulled in. He spared me a look, one that challenged me to deny his claim. Or perhaps that look was meant to dare me to admit I've missed him. This is why we're best friends, Al. Because of kismet and coincidence. Right. I rolled my eyes. Kismet and coincidence weren't why we'd been best friends. We were the kids who weren't into sports or being in the choir, like my cousin Joy. We were the kids who spent most of our spare time at the Sleigh Café either in the kitchen or the back alley. If we were in the kitchen, he'd be baking while I watched him or binged dance videos on YouTube. And if we were in the alley, he'd be flipping through a cookbook from the library while I'd practice dance routines. We'd been best friends because we weren't interested in the school experience, in homecoming, spirit week, or prom. We'd been the oddballs who never seemed to have a significant other. We'd been interested in getting a head start on our futures, which lay on the road out of town and across the Christmas River Bridge. Why had we rushed? 10 years later, my future was on the verge of flaming out, while Nick's, I'd heard, was still on the rise. But friendship. Were we friends if we haven't spoken in years? Without asking me if I needed a ride, Nick carried my things to his truck, tossing everything into the rear cab. Nick opened the passenger door and turned to watch me walk in his footsteps through the snow. A look of concern settling over his fine-looking face. Are you limping? A warm feeling descended over me. Oh, yeah. We were still friends. No limp, I lied, trying my best to walk like my right metatarsal hadn't suffered a stress fracture from overuse and had been bothering me since October. Cut me some slack. My foot fell asleep on the bus and the snow is 6 inches deep. His gaze narrowed with suspicion. We'll see. I climbed into his truck and smirked down at him. How did you know when my bus would arrive? He laid a finger on his nose and wiggled it from side to side, a private joke between us that Santa's magic was at play. I used to chuckle when he did that. Today, I wasn't buying it. Did you overhear my mom mention me while she picked up coffee at the Sleigh Café? I might have heard her mention your bus was arriving this afternoon and heard her say you'd call when you needed a ride. Grinning, Nick closed the door on me and came around to the driver's side. I snapped my safety belt in place, noticing a big, handmade sign resting on the dashboard in front of me. It had a large, hand-drawn Christmas tree and the words, "Welcome home, Allie." Knowing Nick, he'd seen me and forgotten all about his sign. Dork. I wanted to hug him all over again. Cute sign, I told him when he buckled in and started up the truck. "I'll be home for Christmas" filled the cab, provided by the radio he always left on. There was a cardboard air freshener in the shape of a Christmas wreath dangling from his rearview mirror and a candy cane in his cup holder. Christmas dork. I grinned. That used to be me, too, before I'd been bitten by the dancing bug. Al, you can take that sign and put it in your scrapbook with all those rave reviews I bet you got in New York. There were no rave reviews for the chorus line. The scrapbook he'd given me when I left Christmas Mountain a decade ago was largely empty. Reality check time. I knew why Broke Me was in town. I had to make a decision about my career, return to New York City to dance, try my luck elsewhere, or retire. My gut clenched at the idea of giving up. I took slow, calming breaths and thought of other things, like Nick. I turned the radio volume down. "I thought you were in New Orleans, apprenticed to some great chef." I kept up with news of my hometown. I was on the Christmas Mountain Herald daily email newsletter. Just last summer, they'd done a feature on Nick. "I wouldn't expect you to be home so soon after Thanksgiving." "I came home early because there's a family emergency." Nick smiled though, as if the crisis wasn't dire, and then went on to explain, "My younger sister Noelle is having her first baby. She and her husband live in Denver. Mom plans to drive down there this week. Leaving you in charge of the Sleigh Café?" The coffee shop his mother owned. He spared me a reproachful look. "Don't make it sound like covering at the cafe is a step down for me. I love that place. And so do you." I nodded. It was true. The Sleigh Café was one of Christmas Mountain's most popular restaurants, located across from the town square on Main Street. They did a good breakfast, lunch, and dinner business but also provided a good cup of coffee and a pastry for folks on the go. The Sleigh Café was a large part of the pleasant memories I had of my hometown. Just thinking about it brought to mind cheerful customers bustling in for refueling or because they smelled Nick's baked goods and couldn't resist. I'd had my first sip of coffee there. And my first look at a family different from my own, where everyone had equal importance. Yes, I had good memories of the Sleigh Café, but I hadn't been there in years. I was a gypsy in the truest sense of the word. I'd spent the last 5 years with my emotional attachments compartmentalized to make it easier to move from one production to another, one company to another, one home base to another. All in the name of building my career. Everything I owned was packed and on the seat behind me. What does that say about 28-year-old me? I didn't want to think about that, especially not when compared to my worldly, accomplished best friend. Nick drove over the bridge and across Christmas River toward the center of town, toward historic buildings and Christmas traditions. That was the thing about Christmas Mountain. It gave you a nice, whopping dose of Christmas. Already, I could feel myself happily being sucked into anticipatory bliss from frosted holiday cookies and a wide selection of warm, fragrant pies. I could imagine myself sprawled on the family couch after a meal of turkey leftovers, binging Christmas movies, from the classics to Hallmark ones. I wouldn't worry about what my next job would be or how my mother would judge my next role. Was I dreaming of retirement? I shook my head a little, not comfortable with the thought. Instead, I came back to the present and Nick. "Did you have to quit your job in New Orleans?" It was rumored to have been at one of the finest restaurants in the city. He shrugged. "You'd do it too, if your family needed you. That's the difference between you and me, Nick. My family doesn't need me. Not for anything. My mother would never disrupt my career. After all, she was the driving force behind it. If your foot is really fine, you should dance in the Christmas extravaganza this year." Nick reached over and tapped the welcome sign on the dashboard. I'll make you another poster. One that says, "One night only, our superstar, Allie." The Christmas extravaganza was a community event where kids and adults alike took to the stage. It was held on the eve of December 25th. I stared at my hands in my lap, feeling like a fraud. I'm not home to perform. If anyone asked, I was here to regroup and recharge before heading out again. According to my mother, quitters retired. I'd never wanted to be a quitter. But I also knew I wouldn't be professionally dancing in my 60s. At some point, I had to say no more. But when would I know it was time? Allie Jameson is too big a star for hometown theater now. Is that what I'm hearing? Nick teased, reaching over to gently check my chin, bringing my head up and around to face him. There was something serious about the way he looked at me, as if searching for answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. My mom would say that would dilute my brand. And how did I feel? My shoulders tensed. Nike didn't seem to notice. He'd already returned his attention to the road. Wow. Your foot must really be injured. Used to be you'd dance anywhere, anytime, oftentimes without being asked. Nick turned down Main Street, which per tradition was decorated to the hilt. I was happy to immerse myself in the snowy, winter wonderland rather than dwell on lingering injuries or dismal job prospects. The old-fashioned lampposts were draped with fir garland. The small storefronts, the florist, Jingle Bell Bakery, the ice cream shop, and bookstore had windows painted with Frosty, Happy Reindeer, and Santa Claus and wreaths hung from shop doors. Everything looked welcoming and authentic, not like the bright, often garish, production that was Christmas in New York City. I missed this. It was Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks before Christmas. Shoppers filled the sidewalks, carrying bags and gazing in store windows. Couples headed toward Christmas Falls where they'd undoubtedly hang an ornament on the sharing tree behind the kissing bench, hoping the tradition would solidify their love. A Victorian choir sang to a small crowd in the town square. Everywhere I looked was the joy of the season, fellowship, song, sparkle. Nick stopped at the intersection where the Sleigh Café was located. Do you need a coffee? I perked up. Don't I always? I'll buy. Even better. Smiling, Nick turned the corner and found a place to park. Before I had the door fully open, Nick was there to help me out, placing his big hands on my waist and lifting me to the ground. He made me breathless in a way my best friend never had before. What was that for? Your injury. His hands lingered a little too long on my waist before he turned, leading me to the back door of his mother's cafe. You worry too much. I followed, limping only a little because days on the bus and off my foot had truly done some good. I'm fine. No, you're not. Nick held the door for me, giving me a look that said he knew me better than anyone in the world. A part of me wished that was still true. We entered the Sleigh Café's kitchen. Even though it wasn't a mealtime rush, there were still cooks bustling about, preparing food orders. A glance toward the pass-through showed a coffee barista filling orders near the front of the cafe. Nick's mother Holly took a tray of pumpkin tarts out of the oven. She saw me and gave a little squeal. Allie! And then she was hugging me, squeezing me with her oven-mitt hands. And I couldn't remember the last time I'd been smothered with physical affection. My family only hugged during awkward farewells and somber funerals. And I had few friends in New York. Impulsively, I hugged Holly back. Are you here to dance in the Christmas extravaganza? Nick's mother asked upon releasing me. No. We're here for coffee, Nick said before I could. He tugged me through the kitchen to the cafe proper. A pretty, blonde teenager wearing a Santa hat and a bright green Sleigh Café apron was making an espresso for a customer. Being back was a bit surreal. I took a moment to drink everything in because although Christmas was still a theme at the Sleigh Café, its appearance had changed. First, I focused on the familiar. Christmas music played softly from the speakers, currently a country rendition of Silent Night. A big, live Christmas tree stood in the middle of the cafe, decorated with the reindeer and sleigh ornaments. The fireplace on the far wall glowed from a real fire, not gas. The cafe smelled of coffee and fragrant pine. Not surprisingly, business was still good. There were 3 round, metal patio tables for 2 outside on the sidewalk, all currently occupied by bundled-up, coffee drinkers. The Christmas cheer meters in the shape of Santa Claus still graced every table. If anyone turned the dial to 100%, Santa gave a jolly ho-ho-ho. But changes had been made. The old diner booths had been replaced with wooden booths that looked like sleighs. All booths were filled with what looked like holiday shoppers, if the bags at their feet were any indication. There were chimney-shaped salt and pepper shakers on each table with Santa's boots stuck out the top. "I love the sleighs," I told Nick. He smiled. "Me, too. Dallas Parker from Parker's Furniture made them." I glanced behind him toward the front of the cafe. On a bulletin board next to the checkout counter, colorful envelopes had been pinned, instead of the usual business cards touting local services or flyers for whatever charitable or youth event was going on. There were names written on the envelopes but no addresses. A closer inspection showed the names to have been written with different pens and apparently by different senders, since the handwriting never seemed to be the same. "What's going on here?" I stood before the display. "You haven't heard about the Sleigh Café Christmas cards?" Nick tapped a big red envelope with Lexi O'Malley's name printed on it. It started a couple of Christmases ago with Mom handing out holiday cards to customers she thought needed a word of encouragement. Word spread, and it's become a community thing. Now, cards are dropped off in a collection box beginning the day after Thanksgiving. He gestured toward a tall, narrow gift box without a lid next to the cash register. A glance inside revealed at least 10 cards of various colors and sizes inside. Why don't they just send them through the regular mail? Maybe because whoever writes the cards doesn't sign their name. Not their real one anyway. He reached beneath the cash register and showed me a card with Santa and his sleigh being pulled by a team of reindeer. "Someone left this for me." I opened it and read the handwritten sentiment. "You are enough." Someone had signed it as Hermie. Hermie? Isn't that the name of the elf in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? The one who wanted to be a dentist? Yeah. Nick grinned. I was momentarily distracted by the way my heart raced when Nick looked at me. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Who's Hermie?" "In town, I mean." Nick shrugged. "I don't know. But that's the thing about these cards, Allie." He draped his arm across my shoulders and led me toward the coffee station behind the counter. "They're anonymous messages of encouragement." Anonymous. It's part of the wonder and mystery of Christmas. He put his finger on his nose and wiggled it. "Christmas magic." I waved him off. "Doesn't it bother you that you don't know who thinks you believe you weren't enough?" It bothered me. I'd always been obsessed with solving the mystery of my secret Santa in homeroom. Whoever sent that card is keeping a close eye on you. I leaned closer to tease. That card could be from Darla Marlowe. His high school crush. This could be a romantic gesture. I'm okay believing it's Hermie. Nick poured us 2 coffees into take-and-go cups, which he then put lids on. "Come on. Our bench awaits." Our bench. The bench across from the town square where we'd sat as teenagers. We'd drink coffee and watch the comings and goings on Main Street. We'd have good-natured arguments about which local Christmas traditions were the best. Nick defended Santa driving through town on the local fire truck. I was all for the Christmas extravaganza because I was a featured dancer. But privately, I adored the idea of the kissing bench, not that either one of us had ever had the opportunity to test the tradition. How my mother had hated our bench and those conversations. "Don't get attached to this dead-end town," she'd say. "You're meant for a bigger life than this." She was the reason I was a professional dancer. She'd seen a passion I had and encouraged it. Some might say overzealously so. But now, seeing Christmas so lovingly embraced, a part of me wondered what was better about living in a big city. We brushed off a layer of snow on the bench and then sat down, conspiratorially close but not as close as if we were dating. Never that close. Not for the first time, I wondered what it would be like to date Nick. I'd never seen him date anyone in town, although over the years after graduation, he'd posted a picture or two of him with someone on his social media, never the same woman twice. Was he the kind of man who held his girlfriend's hand in public? Or the type to curl his arm around his girlfriend's waist as they window shopped? Had he studied the ingredients that made up a scrumptious kiss the same way he examined what made a new recipe delicious? Get a grip on that overactive imagination, girl. He's your friend. I slouched down on the bench and studied the view. A pair of young, chattering moms herded 5 young kids toward the toy store. The Victorian Quartet was slowly walking through the town square singing "Hark the Herald." On the other side of the town square, a couple emerged from the waterfall path, arm in arm, her head on his shoulder. Maybe that's how Nick would treat his girlfriend. I blew out a breath, annoyed at my mental meandering. I didn't even know if Nick had a girlfriend. The last time we sat here was, when? A lifetime ago, Nick mused. Did you miss it? Yes. Although if he'd have asked me a week ago, I might have denied it. There was something about being here that enveloped me in nostalgia. Snow began to fall. People stopped to watch at the snowflakes. In New York City, no one stopped to marvel at anything. Christmas Mountain hasn't changed, I realized. Nick sighed, somehow managing to make a gust of breath sound happy. That's the best part about coming home to Christmas Mountain, isn't it? I nodded, turning toward Nick, drinking him in. Honestly? For me, the best part about coming home was Nick. Just being with him made all my troubles and tricky career turning points seem less trying. When Nick was near and smiling, I could breathe easy. Allison. And just like that, the sound of my mother's disapproving voice stole my breath. Chapter 2. Do you know where I found her, Lee? It was dinner and Mom still wasn't over me not getting off the bus and calling her for a ride first thing. I hadn't come home in 5 years, but Mom looked just the same, short, neat brown hair, crisply pressed mom jeans, a thin red sweater set, and a string of pearls around her neck. The attitude was the same, too. She was the boss and romanticizing Christmas Mountain wasn't allowed, hence her disapproval of me sitting on a bench and taking in the sights. My goal was to keep discussion of my career to a minimum. I believe you said you ran into Allie on Main Street, honey. Dad looked up from his pot roast and winked at me. He was going bald and carried a few too many pounds. But his genial, nothing gets to me air was the same. That's the heart of the town. It's the first thing I'd go see if I'd just returned home. Feels good, doesn't it, Allie? I nodded, smiling a little. Tactical error, you not calling Mom when your bus arrived, my brother Tim whispered from the chair next to mine. Like me, he had an athletic build, unexciting brown hair and milk chocolate brown eyes. Tim was a senior in high school and planned to make himself internet famous by charging people to watch him game online. I'd planned to call, I felt compelled to say. But then Nick picked me up. Allison was staring at the town square, Mom reiterated as if she hadn't already announced this to the family twice before dinner. As if she missed it. Guilty, as charged. I tried to laugh and make light of it. Nobody joined along. Tell Allie about your business idea, hon, Dad said in a voice that encouraged a change of topic. Ignoring Dad, Mom continued on her one-track tirade. I can't believe you came home, Allison. So what if your latest show closed? If you'd have stayed in New York, someone else might have taken time off for the holidays and you could have jumped into their place. She gave a wry chuckle. Permanently. Your mother is talking about opening a boutique, Dad said in a voice that was too casual to actually be casual in meaning. Tim pushed his carrots to the outer rim of his plate. Mom wants to stock her store with dry cleanable clothes. Smart. My parents owned the only dry cleaning business in town, December Dry Cleaners. It was around the corner from the Sleigh Café. When does this boutique open? You could have slid into the Rockets, Mom was saying, apparently oblivious to the rest of us. I still can't believe you didn't make the cut this year for the show. I could believe it. It was hard to dance full out and smile when you had a stress fracture in your foot. But I couldn't tell Mom that. She'd send me to bed with an ice pack and a rehab plan. I may not have known what came next for me, but I did know I wanted to helm that decision myself. Your mother wants to call the shop Bells and Beau's Boutique. Dad mashed his potatoes with his fork as if they'd somehow offended him. I'm partial to Auld Lang Syne. You know, a play off the song about times gone by. Why can't she just call it Marlene's Dress Shop? Tim muttered my way. Just because we live in Christmas Mountain doesn't mean everything needs a Christmas-themed name. I think you're missing the point of living in Christmas Mountain, I told him. Now's the time to bounce back, Allison. Mom sliced her meat into toddler-sized pieces. She believed the smaller the food portion, the easier it was to digest, kind of like my attitude toward family visits. While other, non-committed dancers are taking time away and checking boxes on their gift lists, you and your agent should be pounding the pavement and pouncing on any opportunity. Ugh. It didn't matter how old I was, she would always be a stage mother. Pushing. It made me feel trapped. My foot throbbed. I must have made some sort of sound because Mom shot me a quick glance. You're right. Why rely on your agent? You can post some of your dance video on social media. Recycle some of your old audition tapes. I've scanned your friend and follower lists. You're connected to a lot of directors and producers. My fork clattered on my plate. I'm not reposting anything old. Then we'll have to choreograph something new. Something spectacular and share-worthy. Slim chance of that with my foot still tender. I picked up my fork and stuffed a bite of potato in my mouth. Let the girl take a break and stay here for Christmas, Dad said, frowning. Allie hasn't been home for the holidays in years. Wouldn't it be nice if she danced in the Christmas extravaganza? No, Mom and I said at the same time, although for different reasons, I'd bet. Allison is destined for greater things, Mom said in a voice that brooked no argument. I resented that voice because it marked a line I'd never successfully crossed. This was her proclamation. She'd made her decision and that was that. Discussion over. Let Allie stay, Mom. I hardly know my big sister anymore. We need this time together. Tim sounded sincere, which was surprising. He was more than a decade younger than me, an oopsie baby, and had been given all the things I'd been denied, like a lackadaisical upbringing and the most expensive, up-to-date electronics. Why was he waxing sentimental about me? We should think about the West Coast, Mom said between tiny bites of her pot roast. Lots of TV shows in Hollywood are using backup dancers. Shouldn't you argue with her? Tim was looking at me as if he just noticed I'd grown a second nose, one that needed blowing. This is your life. I shook my head. We'd reached the point of no return. As of a few minutes ago, arguments about my dance career would fall upon deaf ears. My mom was giving a monologue. If I stayed silent and nodded my head if she looked my way, she'd consider her lecture effective. Any sign of disagreement and I'd be hounded for hours. Or days. Or worse, the entire drive to the bus station where she'd buy me a one-way ticket to wherever she thought I needed to go. This was exactly why I hadn't come home in 5 years. And now, I could see the flaw in my returning with a career decision ahead of me. I bet somebody needs a pretty girl to turn letters on a game show. Mom had a faraway look in her eyes. You could use some highlights in your hair. I'll need to help you choose some music and help evaluate your choreography. She sighed as if carrying a heavy burden. Allison's career is priority one. I need to put my plans to open the shop on hold until she's back on track. The table fell silent. Dad and Tim turned to me. There was something going on here that I didn't understand. Dad and Tim were giving me looks I couldn't begin to translate, other than they didn't want me to stand in the way of Mom's boutique opening. You don't have to do that, Mom, I said dutifully, earning relieved looks from Dad and Tim. If your dream is to open a boutique, you need to focus on that. I know where my career is headed. A voice in my head laughed maniacally. I had no clue about my future as a dancer. My only plan was to leave town come January 1st. Rather than smooth things over, my comment brought another round of silence to the table, a quiet that lasted through the end of the meal. While Mom did the dishes, Dad and Tim whisked me to the living room to huddle around the tinsel-decked Christmas tree. Your mother has got to open the boutique, Dad said in a furtive whisper. Why? Dad inched closer. She rented the space next to December dry cleaners last January without consulting me. She signed a lease for 3 years. 3 years, Dad repeated himself in a pained voice. And she's still not ready to open? I couldn't fathom my hard-driving mother twiddling her thumbs for nearly a year without results. She says she's in the development stage. Tim glanced back toward the kitchen. The garage is full of boxes of inventory. And yet, she sits at her desk every weekend combing through websites, asking me if I think a dress looks sexy on the model. My little brother whipped his head around and brought his face close to mine. I do not want to tell my mother who or what I think is sexy. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Why doesn't she open? She says she's not ready. Dad looked pained. Meanwhile, she's bankrupting us. I nodded, beginning to comprehend the situation, although I had no idea why Mom was balking. And I couldn't ask her. I didn't have meaningful conversations with my mother. She talked at me. And I listened. Dialogue was limited. Dishes are all done, Mom sing-songed, joining us in the living room. What's wrong with the Christmas tree? Why are you all gathered round it? Nothing, we chorused. Dad and Tim scattered like startled kittens. Dad plopped into his recliner. Tim dropped onto the couch corner nearest him, leaving me to defend our actions. Tim and Dad were pointing out where my favorite ornaments were, I explained, gravitating to my corner of the couch nearest the front door. Mom, I'd love to see your inventory. Dad says it's in the garage. Can you show me? Mom's gaze turned distant again. Do you know what I'd like to see? Customers in your store? Tim mumbled, earning a poke in the arm from my father. I'd like to see what Allison brought home from New York. Mom hurried to my bedroom with me following. I bet there are some fabulous clothes in that big suitcase of yours. I wouldn't take that bet, I muttered. But my mother had always romanticized my life in the Big Apple. She thought I rubbed shoulders with famous people and dressed like a runway model on the daily. She charged down the hall ahead of me. Mom burst into my room, spied my red suitcase, and hefted it onto my twin bed like she'd been working out regularly and my 50-pound bag weighed nothing. I bet you buy clothes at designer sample sales. I know you don't want to show off, but I'm your mother. You can let me see your labels. She batted my hands away and unzipped the bag. And then she flung the top wide open and stopped, staring at the contents. Okay, I stared, too, numbed by the visual and aromatic shock of sweaty, smelly dance clothes and the fact that my mother's carefully crafted impression of my life was about to come crumbling down. There's nothing in here, Mom. Just dirty clothes. I grabbed the plastic hamper out of the closet and filled it with handfuls of thin cotton and colorful lycra. Once the top layer was clear, I dug deeper for my underthings, crumpling them into a ball because no one likes their mother to see their adult undergarments. Several pairs of gray and black leggings and a pair of blue jeans came next, my go-anywhere, daily wear. Out came a plain black dress I wore for catering gigs. And a few tops and thin sweaters purchased at TJ Maxx, not Stella McCartney or Larika Matoshi. Oh. Mom tittered. You must have left all your good things back in New York. Mom, there are no good things. The truth pressed at the back of my throat, choking me like a misplaced tongue depressor. Maybe Mom sensed I had secrets she didn't want to hear. Or maybe her mind was leaping ahead, wondering if I'd turn the conversation back to the boxes of inventory in the garage, especially now when she could see I had a very limited wardrobe with me. Whatever the reason, she turned and headed for the door, double time. Just so you know, you're old enough to do your own laundry. After she left, I sat on my bed and stared around my room, which actually seemed like a better representation of who I was than the image my mother had of me. First and foremost, my room was a shrine to my dance accomplishments. Trophies, not a speck of dust on them. Photographs, me with hair carefully coiffed and makeup layered on such that my eyes, eyebrows, and lips could be seen in the back row. Ticket stubs, from shows I'd danced in that Mom had seen. A small pair of pink ballet toe shoes, their ribbons fashioned in sweeping bows. Make no mistake, I was proud of what I'd accomplished. But there wasn't just dance memorabilia. Christmas was also well represented. A wooden Christmas tree cutout was attached to the wall. Ornaments were pinned to its branches. A dried sprig of mistletoe I'd been unable to sell one year to fund dance camp hung from my bedside lamp. On my desk, a mug with Santa and Mrs. Claus dancing together stored my pens and pencils. Chapter 3. I slipped into the back door of the Sleigh Café Monday morning around 5:30 a.m. I didn't want to be home when Mom got up. She'd hound me about my career, about creating a short, sensational video that would go viral. She'd want to take me to the salon for highlights and a manicure, services neither of us could afford. The Sleigh Café wasn't open yet, but the smell of coffee brewing was marvelous for someone who'd been awake for 2 hours, me being used to a different time zone. What's my favorite person doing up so early? Nick spared me a grin before returning his attention to his work. He stood at the kitchen counter cutting asparagus. He'd lined up metal containers in front of him, each filled with a different item: diced tomatoes, chopped green onions, grated cheese. He wore a white chef jacket over his blue jeans and his blue knit cap over his dark hair. And darn if he didn't look good enough to stare at all day. If you want coffee, Al, you'll have to get it yourself. The main carafe is full in the front. His mother Holly finished grinding coffee beans. They smelled like French roast. If you want French roast, a latte or something special, you'll have to wait a little longer. We're running behind. Oh. I eased toward the exit, feeling like I was intruding. I gave Marvin, their longtime breakfast cook, an apologetic smile. I'm sorry. I can come back later. You're not an annoyance, Allie. Holly spared me a harried smile. Her long brown hair hung in a neat ponytail down her slim back. We're just down one employee since Eve is packing. Last night, she decided to go with me to Denver. She and Noelle are close. My older sister is also making lists for me to care for Ivy, Nick referred to his niece. You're going to be in charge of Ivy? I laughed, remembering his babysitting attempts when Ivy was a toddler. How old is she now? 8? 9. She's practically a teenager. Nick smiled fondly without looking up from his work. She reminds me of you. Stubborn and dance crazy. She must be a rock star. But, why are you taking care of Ivy? Now that I was sure it was okay, I'd been easing my way closer to the door that led to the front and the coffee. But paused by Nick, swiping a small piece of cheese that had fallen on the counter and popping it in my mouth. What happened to Ivy's dad? Isaac and Eve are very much still married. Holly took the ground coffee container out to the front, presumably to make a large pot of French roast. My stomach rumbled, protesting the tidbit of cheese. Are Isaac and Eve as cute as ever? As I recall, they were always finishing each other's sentences. Nick handed me a small brownie drizzled with caramel. Yeah, they still do that. I took that brownie and bit in. Oh, so good. I guess if you can read each other's minds, you were meant to be together. It would be awkward otherwise. Nick swept up the asparagus pieces and dropped them into another metal container. Anyway, Eve wants to go with Mom to help Noelle, but Eve's 7 months pregnant with twins and Isaac refuses to let her travel without him. So, he's going too, and I was called upon to watch Ivy. That's sweet, I said, a bit envious of Eve having such a caring man in her life. I suppose it's nice of him, Nick allowed begrudgingly. If inconvenient for me. Holly returned, scoffing at Nick's comment. Isaac is a prince, and we all know it. Being princeless, I left them to search for coffee. The front of Sleigh Café was dark. I found the switch to bring up the house lights. And then, I poured myself a cup of the house blend since the French roast was still brewing. In the midst of my first sip, someone rapped on the front door, making me jump. I barely avoided spilling hot coffee on myself. I recognized the knocker and went to open the door. It was easy enough since the key was in the inside lock. What are you doing up so early on a Monday, Mrs. Willowtree? Shouldn't you be getting ready for work? Last I knew, she was a secretary at the high school. I took the day off. I have workmen coming to my house at 7. It's my last chance for a hot shower for a few days while they revamp mine. Mrs. Willowtree eyed the back counter and all the fancy coffee equipment longingly, brushing her silver bangs out of her face. I don't suppose you know how to make a brown sugar oat milk espresso over ice. I do. Not only had I worked at the Sleigh Café in my youth, but during the dry spells in my dancing career, I'd added coffee barista to my assortment of part-time jobs. I set about making Mrs. Willowtree the drink, opening and closing cabinets and the various small refrigerators as I looked for the proper mixing utensils and ingredients. Thankfully, nothing much seemed changed in the years I'd been gone. Small, medium, or large? Large. It's got to get me through the morning. She sounded apologetic. I don't judge. I quickly finished her drink. What I don't have is permission to ring you up though. This should cover it. Mrs. Willowtree handed me a 10. Keep the change. Thanks. I set the bill under the counter and turned to make my own morning beverage. The bell over the front door rang again. And again. And again. Who knew the residents of Christmas Mountain were up and about so early? Nick poked his head out the kitchen door. You shouldn't have let anyone in. We're not open yet. It's okay, I reassured him. I told everyone nothing but coffee until you're officially open. Just unlock the cash register. He did, stocked it with cash, and then turned on the holiday music. Here Comes Santa Claus filled the air with energetic frivolity. I spent the next 20 minutes completing coffee orders, greeting old acquaintances, dodging questions about my stellar career in New York City, and well-meaning suggestions that I dance in the Christmas extravaganza. My mother should have been in PR. I had quite a following here. Carmen showed up to waitress when 6 o'clock rolled around, leaving me to the coffee bar. "You still look the same," Darla Marlowe, Nick's high school crush, told me. "Older maybe. I can see the stress lines on your face." Darla, you're proof that some things never change." Like her snooty attitude and superior smile. What had Nick ever seen in her? "The good things never change, like Christmas Mountain," she quipped, flinging her long blonde hair over the shoulder of her chic red coat and making her exit on a nice pair of high-heeled, red boots. Hungry patrons filled up the sleigh-shaped booths. Carmen took care of them. Customers in need of caffeine went directly to the coffee counter, entering in a steady stream. As barista, I had it good. There were minimal steps from the cash register to the espresso machine and large coffee pot to aggravate my foot. 8 o'clock rolled around and Holly encouraged me to take a break by handing me a plate of breakfast quiche and pancakes. I needed no encouragement to rest. My foot was feeling a bit swollen in my boot. Not painfully so. Just enough to make me aware of it. Nick joined me at a sleigh table up front while his mother fulfilled coffee orders. He took one look at my face, and then reached beneath the table, taking a gingerly hold of my right ankle and propping my foot on his thigh. "You should be resting. Dancers don't rest. We push through." The same way I was pushing through the meal in front of me without one thought for carbs. "Your pancakes have only gotten fluffier." "How fair is that?" "I developed a secret recipe down in New Orleans," he said proudly over the chorus of Holly Jolly Christmas coming from the cafe speakers. "Do tell?" I slathered more butter on my cakes. What was the point of being home for the holidays if not to indulge? My fluffy pancake skill is a secret. He caught my attention with a playful look in his eye. "But you know, I'm the type who kisses and tells." My fork hung midair, syrup dripping onto my plate. How was I supposed to take that remark? If Nick hadn't been my best friend, I'd have assumed he was flirting with me. Impossible. I set my fork down, fluffy pancake bite untouched because this felt like a pivotal moment, one where friendship had to be firmly established or lost in the mire of crossed attraction wires. And his friendship was priority one. The question begs to be asked. Who did you tell? Or more precisely, who did he kiss? Inquiring minds. His lips were stretched in a smile and... What am I doing staring at his lips? I grabbed my fork and shoved that bite of pancake in my mouth, turning to stare out the window at the sunshine gleaming off snow on the town square. A fresh layer of snowfall had fallen during the night, and everything was covered in a smooth, white blanket. All shopper and tourist tracks had been obliterated. And that's what I needed to do with this unexpected dose of attraction to Nick. I needed to wipe it from my mind as if it had never existed. Our friendship was too important to me. Something's on your mind, Al. Nick jiggled his leg, which in turn jiggled my foot resting on his leg. When you worry, you go silent. How do you know? My gaze swung back around to him. And there it was again, that jolt of chemistry that had no place in a platonic relationship. I frowned. I know you, Allie Jameson. There was a trace of annoyance in his tone. We're the kind of friends who know each other's tells and deep, dark secrets. He propped his elbows on the table and leaned forward, staring at me intently. Most of them anyway. My mouth went dry. There was suddenly a sparkle of mischief in his eyes. I know that you prefer chocolate pudding over chocolate cake. I know when you're serious about dance because you hum while mentally practicing and you watch every ounce of food that passes your lips. His voice sunk low, almost to a whisper. I know you hate to admit weakness, especially to your mother. And I know you say summer is your favorite season, but it's Christmas you really love. The snow. The songs. You even wrap presents as if they were works of art. And here, his voice turned husky, and Secret Santas. You love those, the surprise and the mystery. It's always been the not knowing that gets you. I bet they didn't have Secret Santas in New York City. I shook my head, unable to speak. Because it struck me then that Nick did indeed know me better than anyone in the world. And I had to wonder if I knew him as intimately. My gaze found those lips of his. He arched his dark brows, daring me to contradict him or prove that I knew him just as well. I opened my mouth to say something, but the last of the customers left and his mother cried, "Allie, you're a godsend. I think we need to hire you while I'm gone." Nick shook his head, lifting my foot a little as if about to say, "You're injured and can't." At the same time Darla, his high school crush, appeared on the sidewalk in her cute coat and her enviable red leather boots. She stopped and stared at Nick as if he was in a window display and was on sale. "He's mine." I mean, he wasn't. But I didn't want Nick to be Darla's. She'd ruin him. She'd make him stay in Christmas Mountain when a chef like him deserved to live his life out in the world. And that's the only reason I accepted Holly's offer of employment. For Nick's protection. Asterisk. If I'm your employee, I should be doing something, I told Nick hours later after Holly had left to finish packing and check on Eve. Nick refused to let me do the dishes or clean the kitchen counters. He'd ordered me to sit on a stool he'd put behind the cash register. And the coffee takeout business was slow. At any moment, I fully expected my mother to charge in and demand I do something to find a new dancing gig. To avoid that, I wanted to be needed at the Sleigh Café, or at least be busy and look like I was needed. "I can't sit idle," I told Nick. "Check the Christmas card box," he called from the back room. I didn't see anyone drop a card off today. I reached for the box anyway, shaking it. "Hey, there are cards inside." "That's the thing about the cards," he called back. "People sneak them in when we're not looking." I removed 4 envelopes and read the names aloud: Darla, Javi Ramirez, Holly Stocking and me. Mine was a bright green envelope with my name spelled out in small, blocky lettering that I didn't recognize. Who would have dropped a Christmas card in the box for me? Nick came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dark gray kitchen towel. "That's what I said when I got one. Open it." I tore off the flap, eager to find the message inside. But the design of the card stopped me. A reindeer in a tangle of Christmas lights. The interior message read, "Wishing you holiday cheer. No matter the snags." And someone had written in that same small, blocky, blue felt pen print, "Enjoy the season. Rudolph." I showed the card to Nick. "That's it? Enjoy the season?" He took the card and peered at it. "Yep. That appears to be it. Enjoy the season. But you got a deep message. You are enough." "Ow, they're just holiday cards of encouragement." He flung the kitchen towel over one shoulder. It landed perfectly folded, a chef's trick, to be sure. "Don't read so much into it. Too late." I wonder if Mrs. Willowtree dropped this off. She spent a lot of time scanning the cards on the board while I made her order this morning. And she'd come in early. Perhaps to beat the crowd and remain anonymous? "No one knew you'd be here this morning." Nick folded my card and tucked it back in the torn envelope. "Maybe that's why it's generic." I didn't like the idea that I was an afterthought. "Hey, I'm still Sherlock Holmes ing it." I removed the card once more. This is definitely a woman's handwriting. Look how neat it is. Maybe it was Mrs. Leonard. She writes like this. I'd been working at the dry cleaners one summer when the county clerk impressed me with a similar style of penmanship on her check-in ticket. "You're obsessing about a Christmas card." Nick put a hand on the kitchen door. I should have known. It's just like Secret Santa. I'd been enamored of the mystery gift-giving because my family never did anything so fun. It made Christmas feel like a game. And I loved games. Why sign it as Rudolph? I snapped my fingers. Of course! Rudolph's Reads. The bookstore down the block, which had recently been purchased by my friend Carol Bennett, one of Mrs. King's high school choir group from back in the day. Thank you again for the information, Christmas Mountain Herald. I took a break a few minutes after Nick served me a turkey and cheese panini for lunch and hurried over to Rudolph Reads because, hello, Rudolph. The association was a no-brainer. Even though it was Monday, the bookstore had a line when I got there. Why wouldn't it? It was lunchtime, the holiday season, and books were good gifts. It was stocked with an intriguing assortment of books. There were rough-hewn timbers on the ceiling, shelves stuffed with books of all sorts, a life-sized, plush reindeer with a red nose hanging from a light fixture above, and a checkout counter in the middle of the first 20 feet of store. And if books and decor weren't a good enough draw, there were cozy chairs tucked away throughout the store. It was a good place to linger. I took a position at the new releases table while I studied Mr. Abernathy, who was working the checkout line and was older than dirt. His red and black flannel plaid shirt and Santa hat had seen better days. He'd sold the bookstore to Carol, who'd been a year behind me in school. Carol was restocking a nearby display. Both seemed like good candidates for my card sending Rudolph. I approached Carol first. "Hey, Carol. The store is really bustling. You should be proud. It keeps me so busy that I hardly have time to leave. Not that I'm complaining." Carol straightened, pushing her hair from her eyes. She had a model-like ethereal quality to her. "Are you home for the holidays? Did you hear I'm back to singing at the Christmas extravaganza?" I hadn't. With Joy and the rest? Joy was my cousin and the rest were their close circle of friends, 7 in all. They'd sounded lovely as a small choir back in school. Carol nodded. "This year, we're dedicating our performance to Mrs. King. Their choir teacher had passed away earlier this year. We both murmured something about missing Mrs. King, who'd had a heart of gold. I'd only spent 1 term in her choir, unlike Carol and her friends, who'd found their place with the music teacher. But that 1 term had helped me add singing to my list of talents I'd honed when I left Christmas Mountain. "I'll make sure to see you perform," I told Carol. "It would be fun if you danced at the event," Carol said sincerely. "I'm told they're encouraging a broader diversity of acts this year. I'm sure it's too late to get on the program. And besides, if my foot wasn't completely healed, the last thing I wanted to do was perform in front of a hometown crowd with high expectations. My supporters, the ones who'd gushed at seeing me back in town, deserved an all-out dance routine from me." I cleared my throat, getting back to the sleuthing at hand. "Hey, did you or Mr. Abernathy grab a cup of coffee at the Sleigh Café this morning?" "No. We have our own community coffee pot here." Carol frowned. "I say that, but Mr. Abernathy showed up to help about an hour ago since the rest of my staff is out sick." "Why do you ask?" A black striped tabby wove its way between my legs, providing a perfectly timed interruption. "Hemi." Carol picked up the cat. "Sorry. Hemingway can be overly friendly." "I don't mind." I stroked his soft head, cheered by his throaty purr. "I'll let you get back to work. Really good to see you, Carol. You, too, Allie. You should check out the latest Christmas romances. They have all the feels." "Okay." But I was feeling more interested in a cozy mystery. Who was Rudolph? I returned to the new releases table, pretending to consider a few Christmas romances, still not convinced Mr. Abernathy hadn't left me the Christmas card at the Sleigh Café. I'd been a good customer of his growing up, after all. Nick walked past the window, spotted me, and darted in. He glanced from me to Mr. Abernathy and then rolled his beautiful brown eyes. "Are you here because of that card? For once, can't you just enjoy a secret Santa?" "No," I shushed him. It was then that I spotted a display of Christmas cards sold singly by the cash register. Sure enough, there was the Rudolph card I'd been given. I pointed it out to Nick. "Is that evidence enough for you?" "No," he rolled his eyes again. "Anyone could have bought that card. And I don't remember seeing Mr. Abernathy this morning. He could have had someone drop it off. But of course, that meant Carol could have as well. Or any number of people." "Gah." Nick put his finger on my forehead, smoothing my frown lines. And then he laid his finger on his nose and wiggled it. I took this as his reaffirmation that I shouldn't question the mysteries of Christmas card deliveries. "Come on." I took his hand from his nose and placed it at his side. Before Nick could give me any more trouble, the last customer left. I approached the cash register, smiling broadly at Mr. Abernathy. "Merry Christmas. Are you enjoying your holiday?" I waggled my eyebrows up and down. This was it. An opening for the old man to admit he was Rudolph. Behind me, Nick groaned. "I love Christmas." "Yes, I do." Mr. Abernathy's smile seemed worn out. He spared my empty hands a glance. "Can I help you find something, miss?" He doesn't remember me? The chances of him being Rudolph dropped to 0. "Allie wants a Christmas card." Nick plucked one from the display, a white, cartoon cat hiding in the branches of a Christmas tree. Ah, for the Sleigh Café Christmas box. Mr. Abernathy chuckled. Carol tells me the store has been selling more Christmas cards this year because of you and your mom, Nick. He leaned over the counter and stage whispered to me, "They're cheaper in a box of 10. He pointed to a nearby display. I took that as a challenge of sorts. How many cards would it take me to figure out who the card sender was? Surely, not 10. I'll start with a single, thanks. I paid and we left. I think he was daring me. Daring you? Nick moved in front of me, turning to walk backward. To do what? Be his secret pen pal? Yes. I lifted my chin, trying not to feel foolish. I'm going to write back. And when I do, Rudolph is going to give me a much better message next time, one that will give away who he or she is. Nick shook his head. You're missing the point completely, Al. I grabbed his hand before he could raise it to his nose. Don't wiggle your nose at me, Nick. Allison. Hey, Allison. A man called to me from across the street. He jogged his way across, raising a hand to halt traffic as he jaywalked. There was something I recognized about the way he carried himself, like a tight end holding out a hand and rushing through a crowded football field. Except. Recognition dawned. Bixby Daniels? My high school crush? The guy hadn't noticed I was alive back in the day, and now he not only knew my name, but he was stopping traffic to reach me? Be still, my heart. Bixby leaped on the sidewalk and jostled Nick aside. I thought that was you. Something in the universe shifted. The sun came out from behind a cloud, rays drawn to Bixby's short golden hair, sparkling off his bright blue eyes, bouncing off his puffy, white jacket and nearly blinding me. I held up a hand against the sudden glare of brilliance, feeling my cheeks heat the way they always did in the school hallway when Bixby nearly ran me over because I was invisible. Really, Al? Nick mumbled from somewhere beside me. My mom told me you were back in town after rave reviews on Broadway. Bixby looked me up and down. All that manly attention directed my way. I thought I might melt. Nick did, too. He grabbed hold of my arm as if I needed the support to keep standing. Hey, Bixby. Stalking, Bixby acknowledged Nick by his last name with barely contained chill. He checked his cell phone. My latte this morning was subpar. You were at the Sleigh Café today? I blinked in surprise. While you were on a bio break, Nick answered for him. I sized up Bixby as a potential Rudolph. Oh, come on, Nick muttered. Your dad came in today too, Al. He's more likely your man than this guy. Really? There were starting to be too many suspects. I've been looking for you, Allison. Bixby blessed me with a golden smile that wiped all thoughts of reindeer and holiday cards from my head. It's good to have you back in town. I thought you and I could get together to catch up. You know, for old time's sake. What old times? Nick muttered in my ear. I elbowed him. Sure. I'd love to. I'd love to rewrite the bland history that was my past. No Broadway producer wanted me, but Bixby did. Sometimes you had to take the small wins where you found them. Great. How about Friday night? Bixby glanced over my head, his words coming out almost absently. Say 7 o'clock at the Chop House. We can meet in the bar. It's a date plan. Sweet. Catch you later. Bixby hurried off the other way. Hey, Lydia. Wait up. I watched him go, a bit numb. Bixby Daniels asked me out. Dreams do come true. Can you believe that? But when I turned around, Nick was already gone, striding ahead to the Sleigh Café. Chapter 4. Hey, what's wrong with you? I asked Nick when I'd made my way down the block and entered the Sleigh Café. Nick stood behind the cash register, having just run a customer up. Nothing's wrong with me. I don't have any good times to reminisce with Bixby. The implication being that I didn't either. Is it wrong to have a Bixby moment in the sun? To know what I'd been missing out on back in the old days? Bixby Daniels? Nick's older sister Eve entered the cafe in time to hear my question. She was pregnant enough that her blue coat didn't zip up. She wore a large pink t-shirt that had dance instructor printed on the front, reminding me that she'd bought Tiny Elf's dance studio after my dance instructor retired 6 or so years back. What's that tool Bixby up to now? Nick gestured to me and smirked, as if that explained everything when in fact, I was clueless. Bixby Daniels had been a star athlete while we were in school and had only dated cheerleaders. Girl. Eve laid a hand on my shoulder. Bixby Daniels is. Don't ruin it for Al. This is her special moment. Nick disappeared into the back. Exactly. I shouted back before resuming my seat behind the cash register where my card from Rudolph awaited a response. I took my kitten card out of the bag. I'll be home for Christmas played softly through the cafe speakers. Mommy, who's that? I lifted my head, realizing that Eve hadn't shown up alone. A little girl with strawberry blonde pigtails stared up at me. She wore a pink tutu, pink leotard, and matching tights. Ivy, this is Allie Jameson. She's the dancer I told you about. Eve smiled at me. I took Ivy out of school early for a doctor appointment. She idolizes you. You're the lady in the dance videos Mommy plays? Little Ivy looked me up and down. Are you really a famous dancer? Famous? Yikes. I didn't like to exaggerate to kids. I'm the dancer from Christmas Mountain who went to New York to dance. That much was true. It wasn't like I was a household name on Broadway. What dancer was? Maybe Allie will dance with you at the Christmas extravaganza. Eve wobbled around the counter and removed a cake pop from the display case. Here you go, sweetie. Make friends with Allie while I talk to Grandma and Uncle Nick. Ivy stuck the entire cake pop in her mouth and said around it, "Are you here for Christmas?" I nodded, tapping the end of a pen on the kitten Christmas card I'd purchased, waiting for inspiration to strike. It was hard to think of something when I wasn't sure who Rudolph was. Can you come to my dance class? The cake pop stick came out clean. The same couldn't be said for Ivy's mouth. Chocolate icing and cake crumbs dusted her lips and chin. I handed her a paper napkin before taking in her dance outfit once more. Ballet, tap, or jazz? Ballet and tap until middle school. Mommy's my teacher. We're going to perform at the Christmas extravaganza. Maybe you could, too. Ivy did a good job of wiping her face clean before handing the used napkin back. I'm going to play the Rat King because I'm tall for my age. The Nutcracker, eh? Who's going to dance Claire's part? Laura Kitledge. She's my best friend. Ivy grinned, clearly happy talking about her bestie. Do you have a best friend? I nodded. Your Uncle Nick. Ivy gasped. Your best friend can't be a boy. Hey. Nugget. Nick chose that moment to emerge from the kitchen. Best friends can be anyone. Ivy's eyes grew huge. But. No buts. He removed another cake pop from the bakery case and handed it to his niece. Are you excited about having me and Gramps take care of you while your parents are gone helping Auntie Noelle and Grandma Holly? No. Ivy stuck the entire cake pop in her mouth and chewed, quicker this time, as if expecting her mother to come out at any moment and find her eating a second treat. No? Nick looked at me with an expression of mock horror. Can you believe this, Al? I'm her favorite uncle and she's not happy to spend time with me. You're my only uncle, Ivy said around a mouthful of cake pop. I know. Nick grinned. That's why you should love hanging out with me. The kitchen door opened, and Eve joined them. She ran her hands over her round belly. Everything's all set, Ivy. Frowning, Ivy swallowed the last of her cake pop. What about rehearsals for the Christmas extravaganza? Eve bent her knees, lowering herself to her daughter's eye level. I'll only be gone a week, honey. You can practice at great-grandma's house while I'm gone. But you always say we have to practice at the studio, Ivy wailed. Clearly, performing at the Christmas extravaganza meant a lot to her. Oh, sweetie. Eve swept Ivy into an embrace, lifting her up. It's just for a week until Aunt Noelle's new baby comes. Nick plucked Ivy from his sister's arms. Hey, pregnant lady. You can't lift anything over 20 pounds, remember, Eve? Gosh, Nick was sweet. Annoyances over Christmas cards and Bixby aside, I was suddenly proud that he was my best friend. Nick stroked Ivy's hair, looking very paternal and giving my overactive imagination too many romantic ideas. You can practice anywhere, Nugget. And if you ask really nice, Al will watch you dance. But not at the dance studio with me and Laura. Ivy wiped away her tears. Why can't Allie teach Mom's classes while she's gone? Everyone's gaze turned my way. Nick set Ivy down. I'm going to be busy working here at the cafe. But surprisingly, I was curious about my old stomping grounds and seeing kids dance. My studio opens at 5 every night, Eve said slowly, the way one does when considering a new, intriguing idea. Monday through Thursday. The last class ends at 9. I'd be dancing for a real dancer, Ivy breathed in a way that was good for my ego. I gave the dancer in training a smile. I can come check it out tonight. I'm not promising anything. Your mother is the boss, and she can decide if I sub for her or not. Had I just offered to sub? My mother would pop a gasket if she found out. Eve grinned. Like I'd turn you down, Allie? Not a chance. Nick stared at my feet and then at me. Yes, but Al has. I elbowed Nick before he said anything about my foot. Because for the first time in a long time, I wanted to go to a dance studio. Weird. Asterisk. You dancing is a mistake, Nick told me, sitting in a chair next to the bench in the tiny Elle's dance studio while I removed my boots to change into my tap shoes. Let me see your foot. Without waiting for my permission, he took my right foot in his hand and peeled back my sock. It's swollen. Only a little. It's actually better today than last week. Even though that's what I'd been telling myself for weeks, I believed it this time. Not to mention, I've danced with worse injuries. Sprained ankles, broken toes, a repeatedly dislocated shoulder from performing every night with an overly aggressive dance partner. Nick's expression softened. Ignoring the curious stares of stage mothers nearby, he ran a thumb over the slightly swollen crest of my foot. I was hard-pressed not to shiver because my best friend's touch put me in mind of snuggly moments in front of a sparkling Christmas tree. I don't like to think of you hurt. I don't like to think of you kissing somebody else. I sucked in too little air and choked out, I don't like to think of you injured either, Nick. Feeling unexpectedly tender toward him, I took his hand and examined it, knowing what I'd find. I see the scar from the stitches where you cut off your pinky tip. And there are burn marks here. I touched his thumb in several places. From a hot pan or an oven. I touched the back of his hand. And you've got cuts on your knuckles and forefinger. From before he'd been skilled with a knife. I stared into his face, searching for vestiges of the boy who'd been my friend, hoping this feeling of fascination would pass. But I found only the strong features of the man he'd become, the man I was increasingly attracted to. We both chose professions where there are hazards to our work. Nick stared at our joined hands for a moment before lifting his gaze to mine. Pretty stupid, he said in a husky voice that put me in mind of candlelit bedrooms. It dawned on me that I hadn't been on a date in a long time. It's a good thing I was going to dinner with Bixby. Maybe he'd kiss me goodnight and I'd be able to tuck a friendship-ruining attraction with Nick back where it belonged. I saw you posted a Christmas card to Rudolph on the cafe's bulletin board. Nick deftly changed the subject. What did you write? Isn't that supposed to be a secret? After noodling it over, I'd decided on a fairly tame message, thanks for the card. Let your heart be light. And I'd signed it Prancer, because the reindeer dancer seemed too obvious a name to take. How long do you think it'll be until I get another card? Nick leaned closer, until his face was inches away from mine. Will you be disappointed if Rudolph never writes back? Yes. I frowned, not that I was unhappy. Nick's lips were in kissing distance from mine. Why were we wasting time talking about anything? Oh, yeah. We had an audience. The stage mothers weren't shy in trying to catch every word. Good thing we were whispering. And oh, yeah. I shouldn't kiss Nick. He's my best friend. I inched back. Or thought I did. Nick was still closer than friendship distance. Here's hoping your investigations don't scare Rudolph away. He touched his nose and wiggled it. And hoping he writes you back, since you want more holiday magic. The holiday magic I really want is a kiss from Nick. The door to the studio proper creaked open before I said or did anything life-changing. Gosh, Uncle Nick. Are you gonna kiss Miss Allie? If not, Mom says it's time for her to come in the studio and dance. The nearby stage mothers laughed. My cheeks grew warm. I released Nick's hand and put my black tap shoes on. Tutu-wearing little girls aside, Eve had told me they were practicing their tap dance tonight and their ballet the next night. Thanks for the ride, Nick. I'll come back and pick you up later. You don't have to. But when I looked up, he was already out the door. I walked into the studio and closed the door behind me. It echoed with the sound of fidgety tap shoes. A Christmas tree stood in a corner and a wreath hung above the floor-to-ceiling mirrors on the front wall. Do you want to follow me in the warm-up? Eve asked. She had a Taylor Swift song playing with a slower tempo. I'll call it out, but you might remember it from when Miss Wendy ran the studio. I took my place next to Eve at the front. I hope it comes back to me. It did. Of course, it helped that it was at a slow cadence. Toe drops for 8. Heel taps for 8. Toe heel front combination for 8. Back toe tap for 8. Front side back toe tap for 8. Repeat, repeat, repeat. By the end of the warm-up, I was smiling. My foot wasn't taxed at all. The next few hours flew by. I was surrounded by enthusiastic girls who loved dancing. No one was concerned about their weight, the rent that was coming due, or who had the inside track to a spot in the chorus line. No one asked me to dance while singing in key or requested adjustments to my performance. It was heaven. Allie, they love you, Eve told me at the end of the evening, handing over a spare set of keys and printed class schedule plus choreography notes and a short list of students who could be called upon to lead the class if need be. I didn't care that I couldn't leave town at the drop of a dancing opportunity. I'd received more hugs tonight than I had all year. It felt good. And the very basic dance routines hadn't aggravated my nearly healed foot. A little elevation, a little ice, a nice tight boot in the morning, and I'd be able to pull a shift at the Sleigh Café. No problem. I know all the dances if you forget, little Ivy reassured me. She was adorable. I gave her a big smile and a heartfelt thank you. Go change your shoes, sweetie, Eve told her daughter. And then she turned to me. I know it's last minute and a lot to ask, but I'd be thrilled if you took over the next 3 nights. On the one hand, I don't want to impose on your holiday vacation. And on the other, I'll be grateful that the girls get the practice. The Christmas extravaganza will be here before we know it. I'm flattered. And I glanced around the dance studio. It held many fond memories for me. I'd be happy to do it. What was 3 nights, after all? And she'd offered to pay me. Between the cafe and the dance studio, I was going to be able to buy Christmas gifts plus be able to afford a bus ticket to wherever I was going to next. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Eve hugged me, baby bump and all. And that was oddly joyous, too. I left Eve and Ivy to lock up. Nick was waiting in the parking lot with the truck engine running. He leaned across the bench seat and opened the door for me, releasing a welcome wave of heat and filling the air with all I want for Christmas is you. He wore his jacket over a tan sweater with a Christmas tree pattern. I was going to walk, I told him even as I climbed inside and stowed my dance bag with my shoes on the floor. Snow was falling, and the frigid temperature had greeted my toes with a quick and frosty bite, despite my boots and the short walk from the studio to his truck. My family is monopolizing your time. Giving you a ride is the least I can do. Nick spared me a glance. You look happy. This is the way dancers look after a fun dance session. I stretched my arms to the ceiling, bending them at the elbows because the roof was in the way of a full extension. But I was so full of joy and optimism, I didn't care that my range of motion was limited. I could have danced all night. I know a place. Nick slowed and executed an illegal U-turn. What are you doing? But I didn't give him a hard time because I didn't want this feeling of rightness to end, which it certainly would the moment I walked into my childhood home. When I'd told Mom what I was doing tonight, she told me the stockings were taking advantage of me. I disagreed, but since I'd wanted to avoid a fight, I hadn't disagreed loudly. The more I let her bulldoze me, the more frustrated I became. Nick smiled at the road ahead. It occurred to me this morning that we missed out on a lot of traditions during high school, both high school things and town things. I scoffed. Yeah, the high school traditions were missed on purpose. I think we should do a little catching up. Intrigued, I sat up straighter in my seat. What did you have in mind? He was heading for the ski resort. That area had lots of little side roads where teenage kids were known to park and make out. I may have kissing on my mind every time Nick looked my way, but I didn't want to risk our friendship by taking his lips for a test drive. Did I? Yes. No. I swallowed thickly, acknowledging to myself that I was in a poor place emotionally to make decisions of any kind. Nick, I know we've drifted apart these last few years, but... He drove past the road that led to the ski resort. Without thinking, I glanced over my shoulder. Was there something back there you wanted to see? He checked his mirrors. I thought I saw something, I fibbed. A raccoon or possum? Where are we going? To Halloran's Burgers and Wheels. Halloran's what? I'd never heard of it. It's all the rage with teenagers in town. Nick slowed as we came upon a glowing roadside restaurant nestled between snowy pines. It looked to be one of those drive-up and order from your parking space fast food restaurants. But the interior island didn't have tables for dining and was lit only with twinkle lights. And couples, teenagers, were dancing to the music booming from speakers. Nick pulled into a slot and glanced over at me. We never had a place like this to visit when we were kids. You'd have been mortified. He didn't dance. Not ever. Nick grinned. And your mother would have tracked you here and taken you home. She did so dearly love her curfews. Mom probably thought I'd honor my old curfew even now. I didn't have dinner. Can we get a salad here? Dancing had reawakened my inner responsibility toward weight maintenance. No. You'll have a burger, Al, even if you don't have it with a bun or cheese. Nick put his hand on the door handle. Are you in? I've got a couple quarters to put in the jukebox if we don't like the music the youngsters are playing. I flexed my right foot. It didn't pang, which was good. There was something thrilling about being here with Nick. And it wasn't like I was going to do anything more than the Carlton or a mom dance. Okay. We got out and approached the outdoor dance floor. Surprisingly, it wasn't just teens dancing. There was a couple our age slurping milkshakes while they casually bopped around. I didn't feel like such an elderly trespasser. The fast song ended. A slow song began. My eyes widened as I looked at Nick. My heart pounded at the idea of him holding me. Don't get cold feet on me now. Nick took my hand and gently brought me into his arms in a traditional dance pose, one hand on my waist, the other clasping mine and held slightly away from our bodies. I've been waiting a long time to show off my investment in dance lessons. He proceeded to simply sway side to side, which made me giggle. I thought you were going to do the meringue or the cha-cha. He'd scared. I'm trying to go easy on your foot. Not step on it, you mean. I pulled him into a circular turn, pivoting from one foot to the other a few times so that we spun in a tight circle. Hey, I'm supposed to lead. It was a token protest. Nick was smiling. Yeah, but you weren't letting. I kept on teasing because his smile made me feel warm from head to toe. With a low growl, Nick moved into a waltz, head high, gaze trained on a point far away. Who taught you how to dance? He wasn't ready for Broadway, but he wasn't bad. Shoo. I'm counting. I laughed. And that was the thing about being with my friend Nick. He made me laugh. If only he didn't make me want. Chapter 5. Where have you been? Mom came out of her recliner the moment I walked through the front door. She was wearing a pink chenille bathrobe and fuzzy knit slippers. Her short hair was mussed, and with only the glow of the multicolored Christmas tree lights, her face had an eerie tinge to it. It's long past the hour the dance studio closed. I took my time removing my coat, weighing my options. Honesty seemed the best bet. I went to Halloran's after dance class. To eat fast food? Mom sounded shocked. She cinched the ties of her long, pink bathrobe. No. To dance. I faced her, holding on to the light-hearted feeling the evening had given me. I haven't danced just for myself in a long, long time. It was fun. That seemed to mollify her. At least, until Mom got her second wind. Did you touch base with your agent today? I didn't see you post a dance video on social media. Instead, you posted holiday cards for the Sleigh Café. What good does that do your career? A heavy weight settled on my shoulders, trying to sink the buoyant happiness the day had given me. Mom, Allison. So much disappointment. It pinched Mom's expression and constricted her words. Every day lost could be the day that would have taken your career to the next level. My agent said he'd let me know if anything came up, I told her, bending to remove my boots. And I told you that I have nothing new to post, dance-wise. Unless you think me teaching tap class would land me a job somewhere. Why aren't you taking this seriously? I've spent my whole life taking dance seriously, Mother. I lined my boots next to hers and straightened, which was hard to do considering my spirits were sinking. It's a hard life, not at all what you think. I need this intermission. Maybe permanently. As long as it's just a breather. You still have so much time ahead of you. Mom put her arm around my shoulders. Don't get tangled in something without a future in Christmas Mountain the way I did. There was a familiar note in her voice. My spirits sank further. I'd heard this lecture hundreds of times. Mom had wanted to be an Olympic skeleton racer, hurtling down winding, icy tracks on her back on a bare-frame sled. Don't ask me how she fell in love with the sport. It terrified me. But the year she was supposed to qualify, she met Dad and got pregnant with me. Choices were made. Dreams were lost. And everyone in this household knew that Mom had placed all of her escape the small-town dreams on me. Hey, Mom, I said before she fully committed to the dream speech. What did you accomplish for your store today? My mother made a small noise, kind of like a mouse squeak, and froze, arm literally stiffening on my shoulders. My mother was a force. But it felt like her energy was lagging. Impulsively, I led her to the couch, sat her down, and held her hand in mine. We may have been caught in a time-warping power struggle over my career, but she was my mother and I loved her. What's going on with the store? Nothing. But Mom wouldn't look me in the eye. How funny that you say nothing's going on, Mom. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Because that's quite literally what's happening. Nothing. Her gaze bounced off mine. I tried again, taking a more indirect route. Has anyone ever told you about Marlene Covington's pre-Olympic skeleton career? In other words, her career before I'd come along. That woman moved heaven and earth to achieve her dream. Until heaven brought me down to earth, and I had you, Mom said in a tone that was too quiet and unmom-like. She sounded defeated, which made me worry. I'm not that woman anymore. I scoffed. My mother could be a holy terror if she wanted to be. And she often wanted to be. It was one of the reasons she led many of the committees she volunteered on around town. Are you feeling okay? I pressed my palm to her forehead. She swatted my hand away. Stop. You've had your fun. Only if you're ready to be honest with me. I made a show of looking her up and down. You have everything you need to launch. What's holding you back? I have everything I need, Mom said slowly, volume descending to a whisper. Except courage. Pfft, try again. In the soft glow of Christmas tree lights, Mom seemed to shrink back as if afraid. It was true. I didn't know what to say. Don't tell your father or your brother, she whispered furtively. Why not? Did she think they didn't know something was up? Oh, they knew all right. Maybe not that she was afraid, but that something was holding her back. I just feel so inadequate and unhappy? I guessed because I knew how unhappiness could derail the most determined. Me included. My career was not what I'd dreamed it would be. I longed to be the happy Allie Jameson I'd been when I'd lived here. Mom nodded. I feel like I'm alone in this endeavor. Trapped. I can't move forward. And I keep buying items from my suppliers as if I'm open and doing a tremendous business. She blinked, staring at the wall, looking defeated. This was bad. This was worse than me scraping to get by as an injured dancer in New York City bad. And it wasn't something I could solve in one night. You know what, Mom? Tomorrow afternoon I'm going to do for you what you did for me all those years ago. Her eyes widened. What was that? Help you find a way forward. I hugged her. To your dreams. Chapter 6. Nick glanced up at me when I entered the Sleigh Café the next morning. He was dicing potatoes. I was wondering if you'd call in sick today. I shed my jacket and hung it up next to his, staring at the two coats for a moment, imprinting a false sense of coupledom in my brain. Why wouldn't I come in? Your foot. Nick bobbed his chin, glancing toward my feet. You were on it a lot yesterday. That wasn't a lot. I took a brown apron that was hanging from another hook on the wall and put it on. It had a sleigh embroidered on the front. In New York, I'd have had to do all that at a much higher intensity, plus walk to the subway, walk from the subway, and take the stairs to my place. All of which to say your foot is still hurting and swollen. Only a little. It's better every day. Or at least, it was no worse. It was a dancer's way never to admit the severity of an injury. I glanced around the kitchen, greeting Marvin, who was frying bacon. Where's Ivy? I thought you were taking care of her. The plan is that she'll sleep at my grandmother's place. That way, I don't have to drag her in here before the sun comes up. Grams will take her to school, and I'll take her after school. He slid a small sheet of paper across the counter toward me. You're in charge of the front this morning. I read the list out loud: grind coffee beans, make coffee, load the pastry case, write breakfast special on chalkboard, Santa breakfast bowl. It's a hash, sausage, ham, scrambled egg, onions, pepper, potatoes, and cheese. Yummy. And I squinted at the last item. Post Christmas cards on bulletin board. I'd forgotten about the cards. I can't wait until Rudolph gets my card. I grinned at Nick because the cards made me smile and were looking to be the highlight of my day. And I can't wait to see his response. Al. Yes? We open in 45 minutes. Nick made a shooing motion with his hand. Don't let playing detective slow you down. Right. Grind coffee beans. Make coffee. I crumpled the list in my hand and set to work. It had been years since I'd ground coffee and brewed a huge amount of it, but it wasn't rocket science. I managed. I'd just completed the chalkboard sign and placed it out on the sidewalk when someone slipped in the cafe behind me. I whirled around like a true New Yorker, ready for anything. But the interloper wasn't a threat. I darted back inside. Hey, Dr. Lewis. We're, not open yet. The gray-haired woman wearing scrubs smiled and shrugged, studying the pastry case. But the door was unlocked. I sighed. Vanilla scone and black coffee this morning? It was a guess. Vanilla scone and pumpkin spice latte, she countered. Or I could make you a pumpkin spice latte to go with that scone, I agreed. I turned my back to make her drink. And before I was done, 2 more people had snuck in 10 minutes before opening. We're not open yet, I said dutifully. At least, not for breakfast. The police chief pointed at the sign in the window. It says you are. Oops. Dr. Lewis gave me an unrepentant grin. I thought I was being helpful. Before I knew what was happening, there was a line a dozen people deep for coffee and pastry. I worked my way through the customers until there was only one more person standing to ask, why is everyone up so early on a weekday? Doreen Halifax wore her bright yellow and red work shirt with the convenience store logo. Because the toy store and bookstore are opening at 6 for customers who work school or banker hours. My shift starts at 8 today. Aw. I handed her a peppermint latte and then glanced at the bulletin board, not expecting to see my card to Rudolph had been taken. Wrong. It was no longer on the board. Did you see someone take an envelope from the bulletin board? If I did, I wouldn't tell. Those are the rules. Doreen pointed to a small, printed sign on the bottom. The only way your secret card is safe with us is if you don't tattle on other senders. Oh, man. How could I have missed the pickup? I wrote a reply to someone, and I wanted to see who it went to. Doreen Sked. Remember when you were little, and you tried to wait up for Santa? I nodded. Doesn't everyone? Yep. And you probably didn't catch Santa then either. Doreen raised her coffee cup in mock salute and left. Don't take it too hard. Things must have been bustling down the block at the book and toy stores, because a lot of cars pulled up and parked nearby, but hardly anyone came in the cafe for an hour or so. Carmen appreciated the slower pace, advising me not to look a gift horse in the mouth. Around 8 o'clock, Nick brought me a Santa breakfast bowl. I know that look. What's bothering you? He led me to a table, made me sit down, and then took my right foot and rested it on his thigh. I could get used to this. I drew a deep breath, chastising myself back toward the friendship zone while I saw Mommy kissing Santa Claus played in the background. Tell your good friend Nick what's on your mind. I sighed, torn between feeling good about Nick's hand resting on my ankle and my holiday missive being snatched from under my nose. All the customers this morning weren't here yesterday morning. And my card to Rudolph is missing. Aw. You probably don't know that friends sometimes drop off or pick up cards for friends. He almost smiled, pushing the meal closer to me. And you're down because you lack a list of suspects. I nodded, taking a bite of the breakfast bowl, momentarily distracted. Oh, man. This is good. You're just saying that because you don't normally eat breakfast. Nick didn't smile, which was unusual. He practically smiled 24/7. I set my fork down. Why are you belittling your cooking? I pointed at my bowl. This is fantastic. I admit, I expected a soggy bowl. But the potatoes are crisp. The cheese is deliciously melted and gooey. And the sausage doesn't taste greasy or like cardboard that's been frozen. He drew up in his seat, seemingly offended. You expected soggy? And cardboard? I reached across the table and swatted his arm. Is that all you heard? The negative? Instead of arguing with me, he stared out the front window. I'm in a weird, transitional place. The negative is easier to believe than the positive. Well, it shouldn't be. Everything you put your mind to will work out. I was sure of it. A trio of women bustled in. They carried big bags loaded with toys and smaller bags from the bookstore. We need 3 breakfast specials and 3 pumpkin spice lattes. The tallest woman stepped forward when Carmen directed them to a sleigh table. I'm paying today, ladies. Merry Christmas. 3 Santa breakfast bowls coming right up. Nick set my foot down and then returned to the kitchen. Carrying my bowl behind the counter, I made a mental note to ask him about his confidence issues later. What was wrong with him? He was a rock star chef. Look, Tisha. One of the women pointed at the bulletin board. There's a Christmas card for you. The tall woman turned, gasping. I always wanted a Christmas card here. I should write one for someone else. I bought a box of Christmas cards at the bookstore, the woman who'd spotted Tisha's name said. Let's decide who to send one to while we wait for our food. You bought a box. Tisha chuckled. Why limit us to just one secret card? It's such a kind gesture and it's the season to make people feel good. The ladies laughed and I laughed along with them. Because Tisha was right. More people needed to receive a card in the Sleigh Café program. I could think of 2 right off the bat, my mother, who needed encouragement, and Carol, who was working her tail off at the bookstore. While Carmen got them glasses of water, I started their lattes, thinking about the messages I could send if only I had a box of Christmas cards. But then I got distracted. All these pumpkin spice lattes. They smelled so good. They made me want some pumpkin pie. Nick had made pumpkin tarts for the pastry case, and I had my eye on one. After I'd made the trio's coffees, I ate the rest of my Santa breakfast bowl and went through the Christmas card box. Again, I was surprised that there were cards inside when I hadn't seen anyone drop them off. Listen to this. Tisha read from her Christmas card, you add to the holiday sparkle. Ah, her friends chimed in. Don't let the changes in your life get you down. Tisha looked teary-eyed. Ah, her friends chorused again. It's signed a former Scrooge. I can't imagine who that is. But I guess everybody in town knows John left me. Tisha wiped her eyes. Just knowing that someone cares enough to send me a note of encouragement, she heaved a sigh. I can continue to sparkle. I was pulling for Tisha. Later that morning, I took my break to visit the bookstore, planning to buy a box of holiday cards. Inspired by Tisha, I was officially in the holiday mood, more interested in giving than receiving or even figuring out who Rudolph was. Although that was still top of mind. I passed over the Nutcracker-themed box, that seemed too obvious coming from a dancer, and chose a set with Santa's elves dancing around a Christmas tree on December 25th. Inside, the sentiment was a standard, Happy Holidays. It was perfect. Instead of Mr. Abernathy, a tall, middle-aged woman rang up my purchases. Carrying my box of cards, I walked slowly back to the Sleigh Café. A group of school children were assembling around the Christmas tree on the town square. They began to sing Silent Night. Allie! My cousin Joy flagged me down, jogging across the street from the town square. I heard you were back. She hugged me. My son Max and his class are singing in the town square this Saturday. He's the one with the bright green hat. She pointed him out, probably knowing I hadn't seen him in 5 years and might not recognize him. Max looks cute. I guess he was inspired by you catching the singing bug again. Carol told me about you and your friends singing at the Christmas extravaganza in honor of Mrs. King. I think Max was born a ham. Joy beamed with pride. How are you doing? Any special man in your life? No, I thought longingly of Nick when I should have been looking forward to my date with Bixby. How about you? Well, she blushed, pressing her mittened hands to her cheeks. I don't know why I'm even telling you this. Normally, my life is the definition of boring, but someone moved in next door. His name is Steve and, her gaze clouded with worry. I assumed that was because she was divorced and might not have complete faith in love. It's okay to hope for something more, Joy. You deserve a second chance at a happily ever after. Her smile returned. I do, don't I? She hugged me and then went back to the town square where the kids were finishing up Silent Night. I headed for the Sleigh Café. Well, hello, Miss Allison. Grams, Nick's grandmother, stood behind the counter, bopping her head to the beat of Jingle Bell Rock. She could have played the part of Mrs. Claus. She had the small, round spectacles and short white hair for it. I'm covering for Nick. He had an appointment at the bank. That was intriguing. Is he buying a car? A house? Is he opening a restaurant here in town? I wasn't sure I approved. He'd studied with the best. Why open a restaurant in remote Montana? I'm sure I wouldn't know his business. Graham smiled coyly, blue eyes twinkling. I hear you did big things in New York City. Who told you that? My mom? I was as bad as Nick, brushing off compliments. Nick told me. Grams handed me a chocolate croissant and then took one for herself. Perks of working here. You get all the food you can eat. I shouldn't. I stared at the croissant, my mouth watering. Grams sked. I have regrets, mostly about not traveling the world when I was younger. But I have no regrets about eating pastry. Good pastry, that is. And my grandson makes darn good pastry. He does. I took a bite. It was light and buttery with just enough chocolate to satisfy my sweet tooth. I suspected his kiss would satisfy my craving for kisses, too. That's the holiday spirit. Grams dabbed at her mouth with a paper napkin. Did you have a circle of friends in New York to celebrate the holidays with? To have that second piece of pie? Well, not exactly. Luckily, that was the end of my break because a stream of people filled the cafe on work breaks of their own. There was no time for idle chit-chat. When things settled down and Grams left, I wrote some encouraging words in a few Christmas cards, addressed them, and posted them on the bulletin board for Mom, Carol, and Joy. I'd signed all of them Prancer. And then I stared at the nearly full bulletin board. There were so many cards that hadn't been picked up, including ones that had been there on Sunday afternoon. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and then posted them on social media, tagging the Sleigh Café's account and encouraging people to swing by. I texted Holly to let her know and asked her if she'd share my post on her page. What good were words of encouragement if you never knew they'd been given? Chapter 7. Nick was cagey about his trip to the bank when he returned, dodging my question by dropping one of his own. Do you want to grab a coffee and sit on our bench? Our bench. My heart beat a little faster. I don't have time today. I promised my mother I'd spend time with her. But it was clear to me who I wanted to spend time with. Nick. It was 2:30. A bubbly, blonde teenager by the name of Lainey showed up just then, along with Ivy, who was dropped off by Grams and disappointed that I was leaving for the day. Any opportunity to talk privately with Nick was lost. I wanted to dance for you. Ivy pulled a black leotard, matching tights and demi-skirt from her backpack. The Rat King is a big part. I have to be good. And that means lots of practice. You'll be fine, I reassured her. In the meantime, you can dance for your Uncle Nick. I need to go help my mom. See you tonight. Carrying 2 cups of coffee, I left the cafe and walked around the corner to December dry cleaners. My mother stood behind the counter, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I was barely in the door before she was charging out, pushing me ahead of her and calling to my dad, "Honey, I'll be right back." "No, you won't." I handed Mom a coffee. "You can't possibly show me your shop and tell me your plans in less than an hour." She mumbled something I didn't catch, unlocked the entrance to the empty shop next door, and hustled me inside, clicking the lock against any intrusion. I glanced around. Built-in shelving units listed against one wall. For circular racks designed to hang clothes had been dragged to one side. There was a sales counter halfway back and what looked like changing rooms beyond that. It was just as bland as our dry cleaning shop. It needed pizzazz. It needed energy. It needed personality. On a positive note, the entire space was large enough to be a stage, but that wasn't what it needed to be. For the next 2 years, it needed to be a successful boutique. Or we needed to see a lawyer about breaking Mom's lease and then contact her suppliers to return merchandise. Oddly enough, I could see it properly painted, accented, and staged. All that time on Broadway watching plain sets transformed into something magical must have paid off. I could see the palette, lighter, beach tones that promised a respite from the mountains and Christmas. I could see sections allocated for clothing, for gifts, for collectibles, ornaments, and such. There was enough room at the sales counter for a wrapping station. "Well?" Mom asked, sounding timid. "What do you think?" "It's clean," I said absently, still lost in envisioning what the space could be. In fact, it smelled as if it had been freshly disinfected. I was reminded that my mom could be a little OCD when it came to germs. Not that anything was wrong with that after the world had been through a pandemic. Someone knocked on the window, startling us both. Judith Smith shoved her hands in her beige stadium jacket and shouted, "When are you opening, Marlene?" "Soon." Mom waved her off before turning her back and crossing her arms over her chest. "Judith Smith." She huffed. "She's one of the biggest gossips in town. Let's remember that when you finally open. Tell her first. You need all the buzz you can get." I walked the length of the store. "You need Dad to build you more hanging space, don't you? Tim mentioned you purchased dry cleanable merchandise and I'm assuming it needs to be displayed hung." "Yes, no, Mom wrung her hands. "That was my plan. But then I realized that most people in town don't wear clothes that need dry cleaning. Few people wear business suits or silk blouses to work anymore." She groaned. "I don't know what made me think I could do this. It's a disaster." I took Mom's hands in mine. "It's only a disaster if you don't try. This is stage fright, that's all. Now, take a deep breath and tell me what you envision here. How do you want people to feel when they come in?" It was a tactic I'd heard choreographers ask of their directors during the planning stages of a new Broadway show. Mom's features pinched. "Dreams you hold inside don't come true." That was something she'd always told me. It was something she'd learned from her skeleton coaches back in the day. My mother looked at me. And she didn't look at me the way she usually did, as if studying me to find a weakness she needed to train out of me. She looked at me with wonder and her hands suddenly returned my grip with strength. "You're right. Dreams need to be heard." I nodded, somewhat speechless by the change in her attitude. "I want people to walk in the store and think, I have to buy everything in here. Because once they look around, they'll find all the merchandise irresistible." Her grip on my hands increased. "Except, I can't tell anymore if what I bought is something anyone else will like." I was reminded that she'd been asking my brother Tim for advice on what to buy. 17-year-old boys probably didn't have the same taste as my mother and her peers. But who knew what was hidden in those boxes in the garage? "Tomorrow after our shifts are over, Nick and I will move your inventory over here. We'll look at everything. Put your trust in me, Mom. If you want, I'll take care of everything." Everything. My mother drew a belabored breath. "Tomorrow you'll see how big of a mistake I've made, and you just might change your mind." Chapter 8. Tuesday's classes at Little Elf's Dance Studio started with ballet for toddlers at 5 and ended with ballet for high school girls at 9. The toddler girls were performing a beginner's ballet to Waltz of the Snowflakes from the Nutcracker. Their moves were very basic: first position, second position, and so on, followed by running on their toes in a circle and then repeating. I had them practice their positions and let them scurry through the dance twice. They were adorable and their mothers gushed over my presence. Ivy's class came in next. Half the class were toy soldiers, and the others were the rats. Ivy's bestie Laura was dancing the role of Clara, technically not a part of the fight between the rats and toy soldiers. But Eve had worked something out in a much shorter version of the classic ballet. And it was all done without toe shoes. The elementary school girls wore regular ballet slippers. Mom says we don't get our cardboard swords until a few days before the Christmas extravaganza, Ivy said solemnly. We all pretend we have them by holding glow sticks. On cue, 12 little girls snapped their glow sticks and requested I turn down the lights for their performance. There was mayhem when they marched between the ranks of their opponent, and I could understand why Eve didn't want them holding larger swords, even if they were cardboard. We spent most of their session walking through the advance of the fight portion of the dance. Fortunately, no toy soldiers or rats were injured during our rehearsal, for which the stage moms were grateful. The next class were middle schoolers. Their ballet was the Waltz of the Flowers from the Nutcracker. The girls had good form, although they weren't performing the dance with toe shoes. I encouraged them to channel delicate flowers in their movements and to think about arm and leg placement. For the little instruction I gave, the dancers and their parents seemed thrilled. The final class of the night was the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy portion of the Nutcracker. The high school dancers were all Sugar Plum Fairies. They progressed to point shoes, some recently, or so it seemed as a few wobbled. We did a fair amount of bar work to refine their movements and clean up their lines. When their class was over, a few of the girls asked me if they thought they had potential to dance professionally. Anyone can do it if they work hard enough, I reassured them. At the end of the night, the dancers and their parents were happy, which would please Eve. And most importantly, I was happy. I'd never thought about teaching dance after my career was over. It opened up a new realm of possibilities, although not in Christmas Mountain since Eve was there first. I doubted my hometown could support another dance studio. And besides, the gushing compliments I'd been given felt undeserved. Other than being a Rockette, my dance performance had never headlined a show. When I locked up, Nick was waiting for me in his truck, engine running, the heater on, and the 12 Days of Christmas playing on the radio. The sky was clear tonight and full of stars. How did it go, Miss Allie? Nick looked like he enjoyed using my dance teacher name. He wore his jacket over a white sweater embellished with Santa grilling burgers. Class was good. He peered at my face. I sense a but. Well, I don't know why I hesitated telling him about my career situation in New York. But suddenly, the need to unburden myself to someone was too intense to ignore. I enjoyed teaching, but the girls and their moms seemed to think I made a huge splash as a dancer in the Big Apple. And if I'm being honest, so does everyone else in town. Didn't you make a big splash? Nick came up to a stop sign and turned to face me, not going anywhere. You were accepted into a prestigious performing arts academy. And then you worked for years as a dancer. As a striving dancer, I corrected. I didn't specialize. I wasn't a ballerina. I don't have the best of singing voices, so I couldn't land supporting roles singing and dancing on Broadway. That meant I was limited to the chorus or special performances here or there. You struggled, he surmised, concern in his eyes. I nodded, jumbled thoughts in my head suddenly clarifying. And I'm tired of stressing about where my next paycheck will come from. I mean, what's the point continuing? I'm not an actress. Or a singer. I'm a dancer. And unless I land a role on Dancing with the Stars as some actor's professional dance partner, chances are that I'll age out of my field in another few years. If I hadn't already. Not to mention the toll dancing takes on your body. He gestured toward my feet. Yes. I shifted my feet closer to the seat. What are you going to do? He turned down the radio, an indication that he was seriously vested in the conversation. Stay in Christmas Mountain? My insides spun unhappily. Can you imagine me retiring from professional dancing and living here? My mom would nag me to no end about walking away from a good thing before I was forced to. And people would expect me to dance every year at the extravaganza. None of that would matter if you were happy, Nick said gently. But that's just it. I crafted my whole life around dance making me happy. And it no longer did. I didn't have to say the words. I could tell by the pitying look in Nick's eyes that he knew. Someone honked behind us. Nick faced forward and drove through the intersection, frowning a little. My insides were still spinning. I cast about for a change of subject. I patted the folded blanket between us. What's this for? You don't need to go home right away, do you? No, sir. My pulse went a little erratic because A, starry night, and B, a blanket, and C, a handsome man. What did you have in mind? You'll see. I glanced around for clues. His was an old model truck with a bench seat, but he'd installed a small console on the floorboard underneath the radio, complete with 2 cup holders. Both contained paper coffee cups with lids. Are we going somewhere cold? Someplace that would be more comfortable with a blanket and hot beverage to keep us warm? You'll see, was all he'd say. Nick drove to the high school gymnasium. The parking lot was crowded with vehicles. What's going on? I asked. You'll see, he said a third time. He handed me a coffee cup, then took the other one, tucking the blanket under one arm. Cheers erupted from the gym. A whistle blew. Are we going to a high school basketball game? Yep. He walked at a slow pace, perhaps in deference to my injury. Just one more thing we didn't do when we were students here, attend a homecoming game. And here I thought he was taking me out to park, sit on the tailgate and look at the stars. Get a grip, girl. We're besties. And that's the way I wanted it to stay. I sipped from the coffee cup, because boy did I need a jolt back to reality. Hey! This is hot chocolate. And it's not even spiked. You've got to play by the rules, Al. Nick smiled down at me, and there was something about the way he looked at me that caught my breath. Students, remember? If we were having a do-over of our high school years, I'd much rather pull Nick behind the tall hedges separating the gym lawn from the parking lot and steal a kiss. That's what all the cool kids had done. I sipped my hot chocolate while he paid for our tickets, which made me even more confused. He'd paid my way. Was this a date? Nick found us seats on the bleachers in a high back corner. It was a girls' basketball game. The home team was down by 10 points after the third quarter. Not that either of us cared. Or were sports fans. Frankly, I was distracted by the fact that we were sitting hip to hip, which was about the width of the blanket he'd brought as a cushion, for just that purpose. This just wouldn't do. Darla walked past in her red coat and matching boots, heading toward the lobby. She glanced our way and waved. I returned her greeting. Nick ignored her. I wasn't displeased when she frowned before moving on. My best friend deserved someone better than Darla. I cast about for some type of conversation. Hey, before I forget, can you help me move boxes from my house to my mom's shop tomorrow after our cafe shifts are over? Sure. But it'll cost you a favor. I liked the way he grinned. What favor? I don't know yet. It's a favor to be designated at a later date. Okay. That was mysterious and thrilling. Speaking of forgetting, Nick pulled an envelope from his pocket. I almost forgot to give you this. I gasped and snatched the Christmas card envelope from his hand. My pseudonym, Prancer, was written in the same neat handwriting and blue felt tip pen as my first card. Rudolph replied to me? Maybe. Or you could have received a card from someone else. We had a lot of card activity this afternoon after your social media post. I hope my mother picked up hers. I ripped into the envelope. The card design was the same, a reindeer tangled in Christmas lights. But the message. The best gift is realizing what you already have. Rudolph. Nice sentiment. Nick had read it over my shoulder. Rudolph should have written this for you. I handed Nick the card. You're the one who's far too humble. You can never be too humble. He stuffed the card back in his pocket. I shook my head. Not true. Name one great chef who was humble. Exactly. I sipped my hot chocolate. The girls playing on the Christmas Mountain High School team were hustling and had whittled the gap to 6 points. You should tell me what you're making for the breakfast special tomorrow so I can dream about it all night. No offense to my mom's cooking, but it wasn't Nick's cooking. He gave me a funny look. You dream about food? I'm a professional dancer. Of course, I dream about food. Because I couldn't eat most of the things I loved. Nick grinned. He was close enough that when we looked at each other I could smell the hot chocolate on his breath. I'll tell you a secret. I don't dream about food. Really? What do you dream about? Ingredients? That's still food, he pointed out. Oh, yeah. I couldn't think straight. All I could think about was how hot chocolate would taste on his lips. On the court below us, the girls tied the game. The other team called timeout. The home crowd was cheering. Nick and I stared at each other. What do you dream about? I asked again, suddenly needing to know. I'll tell you if you figure out who Rudolph is. He set his cup on the bleacher in front of him and applauded with the rest of the fans. Did his dream involve the need for a bank loan? And why wouldn't he tell me? We always told each other everything. Well, almost everything. If I wanted to hear his little secret, I'd need to identify the kind person sending me Christmas cards. I reached around behind him and stole my Christmas card from his coat pocket. Chapter 9. Where have you been? It was Dad who was waiting up for me when Nick dropped me off this time. I was teaching dance classes and then... Your mother has me worried sick. Dad crossed the living room and hugged me, which was so out of character that I was immediately concerned. She's been too quiet all day. And I caught her sitting in the garage after dinner staring at her boxes. Dad. I held him at arm's length. Do you remember how you felt when you purchased the dry cleaning business from Grandpa? You remember that? His brow furrowed. You were just a kid. But when it happened, I didn't sleep for weeks. I was so worried that the business wouldn't support us. I nodded. I think Mom worries the shop won't sustain itself. Oh. Dad stared toward the wall filled with framed pictures of the family, although his gaze seemed far away, as if he was seeing something else. I thought it was because I canceled her credit card. Dad, I whispered furtively. You told her before you did it, didn't you? He shook his head, coming back to the present and looking at me. I've been talking at her for months. You know how she can be. She gets all caught up in her own thoughts and doesn't listen. I had to do something. The bank is breathing down my neck. It was a show of good faith to get me on a debt repayment plan. I explained about moving her inventory to the store tomorrow and beginning to sort through things. She needs more clothes racks. Dad paled. We aren't buying anything else for the store. Okay. All right. I'd figure something out, including how to give the store some flair. Go to bed. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Okay. But Dad walked slowly down the hall, as if he was overburdened and would be unable to sleep. Had I told Nick my family didn't need me? How wrong I'd been. Chapter 10. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the Sleigh Café when Nick did at 4:30. He did a double take, sliding his blue stocking cap back a little. What are you doing here so early? I need time to plan my Christmas card strategy for identifying Rudolph. I grinned at his slack-jawed reaction to that statement. Just kidding. I want to be ready when the rush hits at 5:45. We don't open until 6, he reminded me, juggling the keys and a box filled with food. No one in town opens until 6. I took the keys from him and unlocked the door. You want to increase business? You need to be better than your competitors. One way is to open earlier. He turned off the security alarm at the panel, juggling the box of food under his arm. Is this something you learned in New York? The need to be better than other dancers? Yes, sir. Is this why you aren't auditioning for other jobs? Because your injury holds you back. He asked the questions very casually, almost too casually. Yes, I said with equal nonchalance. Are you going to keep dancing? You didn't really say. I shrugged, no longer feeling nonchalant as the walls closed in. If you stop dancing, where does that leave you moving forward? Nick set the box of food down on the counter. Do you want to live in New York even if you aren't dancing? Could you be a choreographer or a dance agent? Or do you see yourself living somewhere else? Doing something else? These are all valid questions. I hugged my jacket tighter around me instead of taking it off. What would you do if your agent called with a job opportunity today? That wasn't likely to happen. Can we stop with the third degree? Nick stared at me, not agreeing. I had the distinct impression that he was waiting for me to answer. And I might have remained silent if my situation wasn't bottled up inside and primed for release. I don't have the answers, okay? I don't know where to go or what to do. And coming here, listening to people talk about what they think I've done with pride in their voices, it doesn't make me feel any better about retiring. It makes me feel as if I've face-planted. Given up. Failed before I've lived up to their hype. Or more accurately, my mother's hype. You haven't failed. There's a time and a season for everything. And I suspect my time as a dancer is over. The words cut me. They cut inside where I kept my dreams wrapped in gossamer wings. I've never said that out loud before. And if I do quit, I need to move on, somewhere. To a place where no one has ever heard of me. Come January 1st, I'm gone. But where? I had no idea. Somewhere? You'd leap before you look. Nick picked up on the direction of my thoughts. That doesn't seem like you, Al. Even if you do want to go incognito. No. You plan. You always have. It's hard to plan for a blank page, I said miserably. Then take a break and consider what might come next. Are you suggesting I stay here until I figure things out? Indefinitely? I wanted to rub my eyes and see clearer, or at least see what he seemed to see for me. Why? What could possibly keep me here? Where are you going? I bet somewhere exotic and classy. San Francisco? Miami? Paris again? I snapped my fingers. Oh, I know. Hollywood. Maybe I could tag along. Don't change the subject. There was a set to his shoulders that matched the serious line of his mouth. You're talking as if Christmas Mountain is the last place you'd retreat to figure things out. And yet, that's exactly what you're doing. I've retreated here because I have nowhere else to go. You can always stay with me. Sometimes you have to let the dust settle before any deep thinking goes on. Nick nodded slowly, studying my face. Admit it though. You've been happy here since you came back. Getting your head together in Christmas Mountain wouldn't be so bad. I've had fun here, I allowed carefully. At the dance studio, the cafe, and with you. I didn't dare say that out loud. It felt more romantic than friendly. Amidst all the uncertainty, I've found some joy. But that doesn't mean I've found my place here. I cast my gaze about, trying to find some new direction for the conversation. But my attention kept coming back to him. To Nick. Too. And you haven't found a place here either. I mean, can you imagine cooking haute cuisine here in Christmas Mountain? I choked out a laugh. You'd be relegated to customers visiting once or twice a year on very special occasions. That's no way to make a living. He cocked his head. You don't know what kind of food I like to cook. That stung. Why did that sting? Maybe because you haven't told me. Maybe because you haven't asked, he said gently. Silence roared in my ears. I let it rage on until blood also pounded in my temples. We'd spent the majority of my days since I'd returned together, but the focus of the conversation had always been on me. I'm a bad friend. I'm sorry, I said in a small voice, eyeing the back door and escape. I came home with a lot on my mind. I've been a bad friend, leaning on you to lift me up all the time. If I haven't botched things up too badly, I'd like to hear more about you and your plans for the future. My traitorous gaze grazed his mouth, and in the midst of an apology, I, at the worst of best friends, thought about kissing him. Your friendship means a lot to me. The world, if truth be told. What can I do? What can I say? I'm sorry, and I'm here to listen. Nick closed the distance between us and hugged me. I'd be some kind of awful friend if I resented you for needing me. You could never be an awful friend, I said thickly into his chest, breathing in his citrusy cologne and wishing I could just spend the rest of December in the circle of his arms. He took a step back, resting his large hands on my shoulders. We care for each other, Al. We always have. But right now. Right now, what? Right now, you want to kiss me? Right now, you need a friend to listen to you sometimes? Half the time? All the time? I had no idea what was going on with Nick or what he was going to say. I stood there, holding my breath. You need to get things going so we can beat the competition. He grinned at me. That's it? Woodenly, I walked to the front of the cafe. Disappointed. Asterisk. Movement out of the corner of my eye had me glancing behind me toward the cash register. Judith Smith leaped back from the counter nearest the Christmas card box. Do you need something else besides a pumpkin spice latte, Mrs. Smith? I turned back to the drink I was making for her, trying to hide my smile. It was after lunch on Wednesday, and we had a steady flow of traffic for sit-down dining and coffee to go all day. And Christmas cards, lots and lots of Christmas cards. I attributed the stuffed box to my social media posts. I'd written 2 in the morning myself, but we must have collected at least 30 by now. I'm just curious about the cards. Mrs. Smith moved farther down the counter and closer to me. Someone sent me one. Was it you? No, that was the honest truth. I put a lid on her order and turned, handing the cup across the pastry case. What did yours say? Mrs. Smith took her cup. Well, It's okay if you don't want to tell me. I received a card from Rudolph. 2, actually. But who was counting? And who was hoping for a reply today? This girl. In the second card I'd written to my secret holiday pen pal, I'd printed, Christmas in your heart has put Christmas in the air. So corny. But also, somewhat true. I'd caught myself humming along with the cafe's Christmas music several times today, mentally choreographing a dance performance. Rudolph had put Christmas in my air. Or maybe that was just my good friend Nick. I sighed. I still felt guilty for the words we'd exchanged this morning and the realization that I was a bad friend. But Nick? Nick acted as if everything was the same between us. What would he think if he knew I couldn't stop thinking about kissing him? Mrs. Smith leaned forward, whispering despite no one else being in the cafe but the 2 of us. My card was from Max. Max? I searched my memories for a holiday character by that name and all I could think of was my cousin Joy's son. She lifted her card from her purse and showed me the front. The cartoon Grinch stood next to his dog, Max. Do you have a dog? I asked. The older woman nodded, wiping at a tear. Caesar crossed over the Rainbow Bridge earlier this year. I'm sorry to hear that. It's why I wondered how this worked. My message was so kind. So personal. She half turned her head, as if she had trouble hearing and wanted me to speak toward her good ear. All I can tell you is that every card seems to be from a holiday character. Most of the cards get dropped off while my back is turned to make a coffee. Was that why so many people were ordering specialty drinks? They took longer to make. I paused to ponder. And Mrs. Smith seemed to sense I had more to the story. There's not much more to tell. I pin them to the board, and they get claimed. Frankly, you're the first person to ask me about them. Even my mother had come by and picked up her card without a word to me. But if the message touched you, I recommend you drop a card of your own in the box. Written to who? I shrugged. Whoever you feel needs a bit of holiday cheer. Lainey came into the cafe carrying a backpack and her work apron. She greeted us both before disappearing into the kitchen. I heard the deep rumble of Nick's voice. Maybe you should ask yourself why it's important to know who sent the card to you. I knew what had amped up my curiosity about Rudolph. I had more motivation now than just uncovering Christmas magic. I wanted to know what Nick dreamed about at night. Lainey came back in, tying her apron behind her back. Nick said he's ready to go when you are, Allie. Where are you going? Mrs. Smith tucked her Christmas card back in her purse, gossipy radar back up and running. There was no way I was going to tell the biggest gossip in town that I was moving Mom's merchandise to her store. I smiled as I poured 2 cups of black coffee in to-go cups. Nick and I are taking a coffee break. It didn't matter if she was satisfied with my answer or not. I put lids on the cups and made my exit. I heard you talking to Mrs. Smith, Nick said as we walked in the alley toward his truck. You gave her some of the same advice I gave you. It doesn't mean I'm going to follow it. I grinned. He made a noncommittal noise, then glanced at my foot. You're walking better today. I told you being here is easier on my foot than what I usually put it through. I glanced around the back alley as I made my way to Nick's truck. Even here, it felt like Christmas. There were lights strung 2 stories up from one building to the next. Someone had hung a wreath on the back door to Rudolph Reed's. The back door to the combination furniture store and salon was open. Instrumental Christmas music spilled out. A man's baritone sang White Christmas. Your foot feels better despite the fact that you walked here this morning and... It was 3 blocks. Hardly anything by New York City standards. Now we're going to move boxes. You need to call me when you want to go somewhere. I'm not that fragile. I tugged on Nick's jacket sleeve, slowing him to a stop at his rear fender. I'll be fine. How heavy can a garment box be? Nick shrugged. Neither of us knew the answer to that. A few minutes later, we found out. Garment boxes were heavy. Very, very heavy. Why does every box seem like it's filled with metal-toed construction boots? I wrestled a cardboard box that could have fit 2 microwaves inside onto the tailgate of Nick's truck. Nick easily slid the same size box onto the truck bed. I told you I'd carry them. I asked you to help, not do the job yourself. I was sweating. I'd shed my jacket and pushed up the sleeves of my sweater. My hair was probably a halo of frizz around my face. Meanwhile, Nick looked as fresh as he had this morning. He still wore his jacket and his blue knit cap. Not a drop of sweat on him. It's going to take at least 2 trips. Nick pushed his box forward and then did the same to mine. We should stack whatever boxes we can on top of each other so we don't have to take a 3rd trip. Hey, guys. Tim walked up the driveway and right past us toward the garage. He carried a backpack and had probably just gotten out of school. Hey, nothing. I grabbed hold of my little brother's arm. We need help. Sorry, I've got to game in 15 minutes. And I still need to eat. He tried to free himself. You do know people pay to watch me play online. Can't disappoint my fans. Hey, let go. Nope. Little did my baby brother know that my grip was strengthened by hanging onto the ceiling bar on various subway trains during rush hour. There was no way I was letting him go. Listen, Tiny Tim. I tugged him closer to the truck. You asked for my help with Mom. Give us 5 minutes. You'll still have time to microwave your Hot Pocket before your scheduled video game session. Deal? Funny. He slung his backpack to the ground. I remember you as being nicer than this. I'm very nice when I'm not dealing with a mom situation. I climbed into the truck bed and wrangled the boxes around in a live version of Tetris. 10 minutes later, our first load was tied down. Nick and I were on the short drive to Mom's shop. We got lucky. Nick was able to back his truck into 2 empty, adjoining parking spaces. And then I got lucky because Dad came out to help Nick unload. Mom lingered behind the counter of December dry cleaners, looking like she was hiding. It was a hard image to reconcile against the woman who'd pushed me to achieve great things. I entered Mom's boutique and began opening boxes, curious as to what she'd bought. The first box was full of what looked like mother-of-the-bride dresses, conservative cuts, heavy interior lining, and colors with rhinestone accents. I hung them on the farthest rack back, reasoning that they wouldn't draw customers in. All those sequins and dress lining had added to the overall weight of the box. The second box was packed with an assortment of purses, all leather and name brand. The packing list in both boxes itemized the wholesale cost of each item. I squinted at the figure. This was wholesale? I was beginning to see where all the family money had gone. If I'd only known about Mom's endeavor, I could have filled her store with New York knockoffs for a fraction of the price. Your dad and I are going to get the next load, Nick told me. Did you know you have a hand truck at home? Nope. A dolly would have made moving the boxes easier. Yup. Dad nodded. It's in the back of the garage by the water heater. Where it is hidden and will obviously do the most good. Not. I smirked at my father. You two have at it. I'll keep unpacking here. They left, talking about the Denver Broncos' chances at a postseason. The next few boxes I opened might have been influenced by teenage Tim. There was enough lingerie to fill 2 dressers, all vacuum-packed. It was kind of funny to think of Tim being shown a lingerie catalog by his desperate mother. And then there was a box labeled mixed footwear. It had chunky boots with wooden heels, chunky sandals with wooden heels, and wooden clogs with flowers painted on them. Did anyone still wear clogs nowadays? Or were these supposed to be decorative? The shoes were heavy. This had to have been the last box I'd tried to lift. I pushed it to one side and mentally marked it as return to sender. Mom poked her head in the store. She glanced around nervously, grimacing. Do I want to know the verdict? I'm still forming a vision, Mom. Go back to your dry cleaning. I had a feeling it would be better this way. Shoulders slumped, Mom retreated. I opened another box. It had plastic-wrapped, vacuum-sealed, ugly Christmas sweaters. At least people are in the market for these now, I muttered. That is, if I could get Mom to open soon. I'd only gone through a third of the first truckload of boxes before the second truckload arrived. Dad and Nick made quick work unloading the truck with the dolly. Do you want me to send Mom over to help you? Dad asked, standing uncertainly in the doorway. I shook my head. I'll stay and help get the boxes open and contents sorted. That was Nick, my hero. Here. You left your coffee in the truck. Yes, the man was a saint. Which only reminded me that I was trying to be a better friend to him. While you open those tall boxes, why don't you tell me what's going on with you? I checked the time on my phone. I have an hour before I need to change and open the dance studio. While I stared dejectedly at a box of faux fur coats, because it was a box of 20 and I doubted there were 20 faux fur coat buyers in all of Christmas Mountain, Nick opened a dozen boxes and shared a whole lot of nothing about himself personally. And by that, I mean, he didn't speak. Not at all. Meanwhile, I was peeking into box after box of merchandise that wouldn't entice me into a store. Glow-in-the-dark t-shirts, cheap bangles, false eyelashes, mom jeans. What had my mother been thinking? I have to say, it wasn't a good moment for me. Why? Because my image of what the store could be didn't jive with the items she'd purchased. Frustration about the store collected in my chest. It built and built, rising from my chest into my throat. It demanded I say something. To someone. About anything and everything negative. How toxic. I needed Nick and his distraction. His words. His smile. But he was lost in his own thoughts. To keep from snapping at him for no reason other than he was here, I made a loud groan. What's wrong? Nick was immediately at my side. Are you hurt? He examined my hands, arms, and face. He glanced down at my feet. I'm fine, I reassured him. It's just that this task is harder on me emotionally than I thought it would be. I mean, I don't know what I thought I'd find, exactly. But it wasn't this. What I considered box after box of unsellable merchandise. What can I do? I tilted my face up to his, planted my palms on his cheeks, and said the first thing that came to mind. Either talk to me or kiss me, 'cause I am about to. He kissed me. It was one of those kisses that included a crush your body against mine element. And good golly, Miss Molly. It was one of those 5-star kisses that weakened the knees and stole your breath. There, he said when he unlocked those hot lips from mine. He smoothed my hair away from my forehead. All better? And then he left me standing there. I sagged against the cardboard box full of faux fur coats and wondered why in the world I had never considered kissing my best friend before this holiday season. My best friend. Oh. Chapter 11. On my first day in high school, I was so relieved to find my algebra class without getting lost that I sat next to Bixby Daniels, completely unaware that he was a year ahead of me or that he was gorgeous. I mean, come on. It was the first day of high school. Cut me some slack for having tunnel vision. Anyway, I glanced over at him, belatedly registering his good looks, and was so shocked that I blurted, "You have the most beautiful eyes." The instant those words left my lips, I wanted the earth to open a gaping chasm and swallow me whole. Spoiler alert. That hadn't happened. And now, another catastrophic mistake had occurred based on stress and blurting. I kissed my best friend and liked it. Oh, that was wrong. Oh, so wrong. My face was on fire, cheeks burning from mortification. Spoiler alert. No chasm was going to conveniently open up and save me from embarrassment this time either. And Nick. Nick had his back to me, carefully running his pocket knife through the tape that sealed boxes. His hand wasn't even shaking. Both of mine were. And my knees. I couldn't have done a kickball change right now to save my life. Was it any wonder that my mouth started running? What was that? What just happened? Am I supposed to pretend there was a blip in the space-time continuum? Have I had too much caffeine and just imagined things? Am I under too much stress? Heck, while I was on an emotional roll, why not toss in one of the important questions? Do you know the meaning of life? Because I knew nothing. Nick turned slowly to face me, wearing a wry grin that only made me want another blip to occur, one that sent me back in time to the moment his lips lowered to mine. Nick snapped his pocket knife closed and walked toward me. Step by step. Inch by inch. I'd watched too many old black and white movies on the free internet channel. I swallowed and held my ground next to that box of fake furs. Do you know, I faltered. Swallowed. Tried again. Do you have any answers for me? Yes. Nick stopped in front of me, laid his hands gently upon my shoulders and gave them a squeeze. You gave me a choice. I took option A and kissed you. You don't have to acknowledge it happened if it bothers you. He bent a little to look me in the eye. Did it bother you? I opened my mouth to answer. And I suppose I did answer, but my response came out sounding like a wheezy balloon. No. Good. His smile lightened a little. As for your questions, there was no blip in the space-time continuum. I don't think you've had too much caffeine, but I do think you're under a lot of stress. As for the meaning of life, he shrugged. I think it's to be kind to one another, find something you're passionate about, and love someone. Aw. I tried to nod but only succeeded in ratcheting my chin up a few notches. No downward motion was made. He still rested his hands on my shoulders. We still stared into each other's eyes. There had been many times in my life when I'd come to an audition and had to dance after someone who'd just given the performance of their life. In those moments, I'd always felt inadequate. In this moment, I felt inadequate and wanted to flee. Nick's answers were deep and thoughtful. And I was at a loss. I couldn't reconcile what had just happened and I didn't know what happened next, not without asking another question. I cleared my throat. Nick? Yes? He arched his brows. I have a question. My gaze dropped until I stared at the neck of his t-shirt. More questions? He chuckled, a sound so familiar it should have comforted me. Go for it. The most important question is, I blinked up at him. Are we still friends? Nick's hands fell away from my shoulders, and he took a step back. Are you giving me the friend speech? No, yes, no, I need. He pinched the bridge of his nose. I know what you need. Another kiss? I waited expectantly. But he kept his distance. You're wondering about our friendship. You're wondering if I'd been thinking about kissing you before this happened. You're wondering if I liked kissing you. And can we get on with more kissing already? And I'm just going to say that our friendship is good. And yes, I'd thought about kissing you before today. And yes, I liked kissing you. I gripped the box of faux furs with stiff fingers. But then what? What does it mean for our friendship? He tugged off his blue knit cap and ran a hand through his dark hair. I don't know. I don't suppose you know. Nick glanced at me expectantly, hat in his hands. My mouth dropped open, and nothing came out. Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I know you, Al. You like to think things through and make plans. And when your plans don't work out, you like to think the next thing through. I closed my mouth. He was right. And I'm sorry if I rushed things, but you gave me two options and I chose option A. He shrugged. Maybe we should go sit on our bench when we finish here and let you think about it. I nodded numbly, knowing that I'd have no time today to talk about anything, much less let the dust settle between us. Wednesday night dance classes were a repeat of Monday's sessions. Which was good because I was so distracted by Nick's kiss and our subsequent canday that I wouldn't have done a good job as a substitute dance teacher. I had the classes walk through their tap dances. We did drills to sharpen portions of the choreography. And then we went through their complete dances at speed twice. After all the dancers had gone home, I locked up and was surprised to see Nick waiting for me in his truck. I walked toward him with slow steps, torn. I wanted to see him. I wanted to explore these feelings between us. But if I'd learned anything these past few days, it was that I cherished his friendship and his ability to understand me. I opened the truck door, still uncertain what to say to him. Heat surrounded me, along with the last few notes of "Have yourself a merry little Christmas. I come bearing gifts as your friend Nick." He handed me a Halloran's fast food bag. Beneath his jacket, he was wearing a red sweater decorated with white snowflakes. "You went nonstop all day and hardly ate anything." My stomach growled. I opened the bag and took a whiff of all that hot greasiness coming from a cheeseburger and sweet potato fries. "What? No milkshake? Who do you think you're talking to?" Nick handed me a cup with a straw. "Eggnog, of course." My stomach growled its approval. While I ate, he drove around the block and parked on a darkened street across from Tinsel and Tonic, the small local bar. I glanced from the bar to Nick. "Are we getting a stronger eggnog?" "No." He held onto the steering wheel even though the truck was off. "I think what your mother is doing is brave, even if she's overwhelmed right now. And she's lucky to have you helping her." "Thanks?" I said, at a loss as to where this was going. The past 6 hours had been so confusing. Nick drew a deep breath, and I was suddenly certain he was going to confess his undying love for me, which I wasn't yet ready to accept, and then when I told him that, he was going to enter the bar and drink the pain away. I stuffed a fry into my mouth and then another, anticipating using it as an excuse not to immediately reply to his confession. Nick exhaled and turned to face me. "I want to open a restaurant here." I choked on my sweet potato fries and had to spit them into my paper napkin. It took another few coughs to clear my throat and say, "Oh? I know you think I should open a really high-end restaurant in a big metropolis. Why wouldn't you?" Nick looked a bit confounded. "My family thinks that's the only reason I pursued my culinary education, and I'm probably to blame for that because that was my dream when I was 16. He blew out a breath, expression softening as his gaze seemed to focus on me. "But I don't cook because I love to create new and unique flavor combinations." "I mean, I do. But that's not the only reason." Nick tugged the brim of his knit cap over his ears, endearingly like the sensitive boy I'd spent my teenage years with. "I like food to fill people, not just their bellies but their souls." And he stared at me, frowning. "I'm saying this all wrong." "You're not." "I get it." And I did. Nick had always been the helper in his tight-knit family and to his friends. You want to run a restaurant where people can come and be comfortable, both with the food and the prices. It's brilliant because while it makes you happy, it will make everyone who comes through those doors happy. I gestured toward the vacant restaurant in front of us. "So, you approve?" He gave me a tentative smile. "Not that you need my blessing, but yeah." I set my food bag on the floor on top of the duffel with my dance shoes. "Is this why you acted weird about your Santa breakfast special?" He scratched his head. "Probably." "What does your mom think?" His smile fell. "I haven't told her." "Oh." This added another layer of complication to what was going on between us. He told me first. Can you show me your vision inside?" The tension in his face eased and he smiled once more. "I was hoping you'd say that." We got out and stood in front of the building. It had a brick facade. The faded wooden sign above the old double doors read, "Santa's Eatery." I don't remember this restaurant being open. Ever. I noticed a small bench in front of one window. I sat down on it, wanting to get a feel for the place. A couple walked out of Tinsel and Tonic, laughing about something. The sound of cheerful voices in the bar flowed out onto the street until the door closed once more. The couple passed the main window, which had been painted with Santa standing next to a Christmas tree. The jolly old elf was holding a martini glass, raised as if in toast. What would Nick paint on his restaurant windows next holiday season? Would I be here to see it? Nick sat next to me. The bench was narrower than our bench on Main Street. Our bodies touched from shoulder to knee. His warmth seeped into me, and it felt right. I didn't move away, continuing my perusal of the street, trying to keep myself from turning and throwing myself into his arms. Down the block, Mr. Hardy walked his German Shepherd, heading toward Main Street. Several storefronts were lifeless and dark, but above them were apartments, windows glowing with warm lights or brightly decorated Christmas trees. They say this block has been barely making it commercially for 30 years, Nick told me in a quiet voice. My realtor seems confident that this street will grow to be as popular as Main Street in a few years if other businesses open up. I looked around. This street doesn't have all the decorations on the lampposts like Main Street. But I suppose the town council will remedy that if businesses and customers make this another bustling part of Christmas Mountain. I can only hope. Nick settled back, relaxing more. He rested his arm across the back of my shoulders. And that felt right, too. What are you going to call this restaurant of yours? I hoped not Santa's Eatery, which seemed entirely too plain for a restaurant run by a widely traveled and well-trained chef. Don't laugh. He touched his nose and gave it a wiggle. But I was thinking of calling it Bowlful of Jelly. He thought that name was magical. I glanced up at the sign overhead. Maybe Santa's Eatery isn't that bad. Hey. Nick poked my shoulder. There's a concept behind the name. I'm all ears. Okay. He fidgeted next to me. I want to create menu offerings that mostly include chutney. Chutney, remind me what that is again. For the life of me, I was drawing a blank. It originated in India, but chutney is somewhere between a jam, a relish, and a jelly. Nick's face took on a warm glow. Tomato relish on the side of a plate of street tacos is chutney. Coconut chutney is a thick sauce you drizzle on grilled fish. A cheese plate can come with mango chutney. I can serve it as part of the dish or in a small bowl on the plate. I wanted a Christmas tie-in, and Bowlful of Jelly as a name just feels right. I take all my doubts back. It's brilliant, Nick. All of it. Show me the inside. I was getting excited for him. I got to my feet and pulled him to his. How did you keep this to yourself? You must have been thinking about it for a long time. He opened the front doors and let me in. I love traveling and learning about different ways to prepare food, but this past year, I thought a lot about what I want to do with the rest of my life. We're turning 30 next year, you know. Oh, I know. Geez, don't remind me. And when I drove over the bridge into Christmas Mountain last week, I was struck with a strong feeling of coming home. I nodded. I'd felt the same way. It wasn't so bad, was it? Growing up here. That was a loaded question considering his kiss, him setting down roots here, and my future being up in the air. We were two kids with big dreams. Two kids who had to leave to find themselves. Or at least, Nick seemed to have done so. Me? What made me tick if it wasn't dance? My mother's shop came to mind. It was the first non-dance, non-Nick, non-Christmas thing that had excited me in a long time. But the boutique wasn't mine. Although thinking about it did remind me that I needed a favor from my bestie. Hey, can you help me fix the shelves at my mom's store tomorrow? Sure. And by help, I smiled sweetly. I mean, can you fix them? I need to paint. At least, you're honest. His gaze stroked over my face, dropping to my mouth. About most things anyway. Yes, I want to kiss you, I blurted, because unplanned outbursts were what happened to me in high-stress situations. My cheeks heated. Nick chuckled. There's not much stopping you. Shows you how much you know. Our friendship is stopping me. He cleared his throat. Did you ever think that this is where our friendship has been headed all this time? He was serious. He wasn't smiling. I'm just planting a seed for you to think about, Al. I think you and I have been thinking about kissing each other a lot longer than just this week. I needed time to think, to get used to the idea, to visualize him and me and Christmas Mountain. I wandered around the restaurant. There were square wooden tables pushed against the side walls and piled too high. Wooden chairs were stacked in the corner. The floors were wide planked wood and had been painted a cheerful red at one time. There was seating at a small bar, and behind that was what looked like a kitchen. I tested the sturdiness of a wooden bar stool at the counter, trying to rock it back and forth. It held. Did that say anything about our relationship? How many people can you serve in here? 40. I was trying to picture it. White tablecloth? No. No. Nick stepped beside me and turned, as if displaying a finished product with a flourish. I want people to feel as if they've come into my home for a meal. Tablecloths, I said absently. You need embroidered tablecloths for that type of atmosphere. Or at the very least, table runners to give it a homey feel. I could see it though, the same way I'd been able to visualize Mom's boutique. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah. He nodded, leading me toward the rear hallway. The kitchen is outdated. That's why I was at the bank. I need a loan, not just to renovate the kitchen, but to give me a cushion to live on until launch. Those broad shoulders were made to lean on. For me to lean on? I glanced in the dingy kitchen when we reached it. You sure have your work cut out for you. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner? He shook his head, smiling at me like he never wanted to stop smiling, like just looking at me made him happy. Lunch and dinner only. But you make such a good breakfast, I protested weakly, realizing that I often smiled at him the same way. But that didn't mean we were destined to be together. At some point, my parents must have smiled at each other like that, and look at them now. I don't want to take any business away from the Sleigh Café, Nick was saying, continuing to prove he was a good man. And suddenly, I was filled with the need to wrap my arms around him. Him. My friend. If kissing didn't work out, how could we remain friends? I cleared my throat and stepped away from Nick. Where do the stairs go? Let me show you. If Nick noticed my nerves, he didn't let on. He continued to smile and appeared genuinely enthused about his tour. It's an apartment. My apartment. He stopped at the bottom step and faced me, smile fading because I wasn't smiling. This could be our apartment. We stood staring at each other. Thoughts of kisses and romance filled my head once more. Everything was moving too fast. But it was tempting. He was tempting. I cleared my throat again, trying to clear those thoughts away. Your friend Allie wants to see where you'll be living, Nick. Nick's smile couldn't quite cover his disappointment. He led me up a creaky, narrow set of stairs. The realtor mentioned I could put a lock on the stairway door and rent it out. You know, after I outgrow the space. Settle down and get married, he meant. Have babies, he meant. With me? We climbed the stairs and reached the landing. As below, it was a narrow space. There was a long hallway with one small bedroom and a bathroom. And then the stairway ended, revealing a small galley kitchen and decent-sized living room whose windows overlooked the street where we parked. There was dust on the floor and cobwebs in the corners. It didn't matter. It was a charming space and I immediately felt at home, the way Nick made me feel at home. I walked toward the windows. You could knock down the kitchen wall and have all this open. That's what I thought, too. He followed me, giving me space. I wasn't sure I wanted it. But I needed to, didn't I? Geez, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. We stood at the windows, taking in the view. I can see the star on top of the town square Christmas tree. I pressed my nose to the glass to look the other way. And the flashing beacon on top of the Christmas River Bridge. There's no apartment or offices on the second story directly on the other side of the street, which gives it some privacy. I see now why you like it. It felt like a good place to start a new life, despite the dust bunnies and cobwebs. Impulsively, I turned and hugged him. I'm so happy for you. But what about me? A small voice inside me cried. And the sad part was that I didn't know the answer to that question. Chapter 12. My brother Tim was waiting for me when I got home that night. He sat wrapping presents on the carpet at the foot of the Christmas tree with his earbuds in. I hung up my coat and removed my boots. What are you doing wrapping Christmas presents so early? That's not like you. He didn't answer. But then again, how could he have heard? Music blared through those earbuds, indistinguishable beyond the boom 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 of the beat. I walked over to him, waving to catch his attention. He tapped an earbud and the music cut out. I'm wrapping presents now because I have a busy couple of weeks ahead of me. I perused his gifts. Would you like some help? He had no skill. His corners lacked sharp angles. Excess paper was rolled and flattened. He'd slapped on stickered bows instead of using ribbon as accents. Tim shook his head. I'm not you. Oh. I sat down next to him on the carpet and picked up a gift wrapped in blue paper with a skiing snowman pattern. The tag said it was for me. I shook the small box. It was heavy for its size and didn't rattle. Hey, don't break it. Tim took a strip of tape that had to be at least 6 inches long. He placed it along the seam on the back of the present he was wrapping. I'm busy. I don't have time to replace your gift. I set the box gently back beneath the tree, resting it on the red felt tree skirt. Are you worried about finals? School? No way. He tore off another overly long strip of tape and placed it lengthwise on the crumpled paper at the end of the box. His technique was textbook boy, but it still made me twitchy. Really, I can wrap these for you. And make them look pretty? Why bother? He rolled the paper on the other end of the box the way one rolls a paper lunch bag. Everybody just tears through the paper anyway. Yeesh. It was all I could do not to snatch the box from him and smooth the crumpled paper into orderly folds. You surprised me. Tim took a small, peel-and-press gift tag, scribbled Dad's name on it, tore off the paper backing, and stuck it on his gift. Sorry. I'll get out of your way. I didn't realize you had more gifts to wrap. I started to stand, intending to give him his privacy. No, he put a hand on my arm, drawing me back to the carpet. I meant, you really stepped up for Mom and Dad. They're still tense with each other, but it's a better kind of tension. That's so weird to hear coming out of my little brother's mouth. He'd grown up in the 5 years since I'd seen him last. That's really nice of you to say. He scoffed. Don't get ideas. You are the bane of my existence. What? Why? Because you're perfect. Hardly. An ornament on the tree caught my eye. I tapped it gently. See this wooden rocking horse? It looks pretty, doesn't it? I painted that in 4th grade. Or rather, I painted the backside. I turned it around so that he could see the mess the back was. The colors ran together to form black on that side. Mom painted the front. I'm like this ornament. Half is just for show, created by Mom's handiwork. How could Nick want to be with someone like me? I returned the rocking horse ornament to its original place, Mom's side out. Tim turned it back so the side I'd painted faced us. This is you. He reached further around the Christmas tree to draw out another wooden rocking horse ornament. I had Mrs. Barry for 4th grade, too. Mom didn't come in to help in any of my classes. His rocking horse was painted a blotchy blue and yellow all around. Mom gave up on me by the 3rd grade. I wasn't an athlete. I sure as heck wasn't a dancer. And all I wanted to do was play video games. I nodded. She always blamed Dad for giving you that game console for Christmas as a 3rd grader. The parents want me to go to college, Tim said morosely. They don't listen when I tell them I make a good living live streaming my gameplay now. I got Mom and Dad new cell phones for Christmas. My mouth dropped open. Even working 2 jobs and collecting tips at the cafe, I couldn't afford to buy my parents each a cell phone. But they won't see that as proof that I know what I'm doing, Tim said mournfully. They think I need a fallback plan. I wish they would have made me consider a fallback plan. Maybe then I wouldn't be at a loss as to what to do with my life after my dance career ends. Tim scoffed again. Why get distracted from what you love until it's time to find something else to love? I suppose there's truth to that. But it's not easy. And increasingly, I felt pressure to find something else to be passionate about. My friend Carol just moved back to town and bought the bookstore. Come to think of it, I had no idea what she'd done in New York. Had she worked in a bookstore while there? I was embarrassed to realize that I didn't know. She's a friend of yours? She's starting over and she's ancient. Tim arranged the boxes underneath the tree into a symmetric trio formation. All 3 boxes were the same size. Did you get me a phone for Christmas? I reached for the box tagged as mine once more. Tim swatted my hand away. You'll have to wait and see. I studied my little brother with his average teenage looks. He didn't seem so average anymore. How much do you make a year with this live streaming thing you do? I make enough. He got to his feet and helped me to mine. And I'm happy doing it. You've certainly got your head on straight. I hugged him. I'm proud of you, kid. Tim squirmed free, blushing. Yeah, well. I do it because it makes me happy, not to make anyone proud. In this house, that would be a losing battle. He was right. Darned if that kid wasn't a prophet in the making. Chapter 13. I was dragging on Thursday due to lack of sleep. Nick and Tim had plans for the next phase of their lives. And me? I didn't know what the future held. Nick wondered if we should be more than friends. And me? I didn't know how to respond. Was it fair to kiss him when I didn't know what to do with the rest of my life or how to make myself happy? Nick was embracing life in Christmas Mountain. And me? I didn't know where or if I fit in here. There was nothing for me career-wise in my hometown except temporary work as a barista and a substitute dance instructor. Which meant, what? A return to New York? There was nothing for me in New York City either. Even though my foot was healing, a fresh crop of young dancers would be descending upon the city in the new year, as they did every year. And the theatrical world liked nothing more than new. Which meant, what? Stay around and see what kissing Nick led to? What if it ruined his happiness and my own? Which meant. I didn't know what that meant. In other words, nothing was clear to me after a night of tossing and turning and circular thinking. Nothing, that is, other than the ingredients in a specialty coffee drink, especially the ever-popular pumpkin spice latte. I was so distracted and muddled that I hugged Nick when I showed up for work and then blew his questioning look off by scurrying to the front of the cafe. I was so tied up in my own thoughts that I didn't notice that Rudolph had left Prancer another card. That is, not until late Thursday morning. I took the envelope from the box, staring at the handwriting used to address it, at the blocky blue letters. And then, I held the envelope next to the to-do list Nick had given me this morning. The handwriting didn't match. Whoever had addressed the envelope wasn't Nick. The realization disappointed me. Deep down, I'd wanted Nick to be Rudolph. And what did that say about where I wanted our friendship to go? It said I wanted to be with Nick. And all the reasons why I shouldn't came tumbling back in my head. Ugh. Back to square one. I tore open the Christmas card envelope with Grandma got run over by a reindeer playing in the background. The same reindeer in a tangle of Christmas lights stared at me, an endearing expression on his face. Inside, it read, Christmas dreams can last throughout the year. Rudolph. Bixby burst into the cafe with his usual take-charge energy. It was his second visit this morning. Pumpkin spice latte over ice, please. Medium. I know it's my second one of the day, so don't judge. He whipped out his gold credit card, noticing Rudolph's missive. Nice of someone to send you a Christmas card. Yes. I set the card aside and rang up his order. Wait a minute. Bixby had come into the cafe earlier today and on Monday. He could be Rudolph. But as I snuck looks at him, at his commanding steps as he paced the length of the cafe, at his intense expression directed toward his phone, Bixby didn't strike me as the warm, fuzzy, encouraging type. He was the captain of the football team. The big man on campus. With an ego to match. And yet, a part of me wanted him to be Rudolph because he'd asked me out. If only because then something would make sense. I sighed. Nothing made sense anymore. Are we still on for tomorrow night? He asked nonchalantly, as if confirming a business meeting. 7 at the Chop House. Yep. Can't wait. I finished making his latte. And without further ado, Bixby left. There was no way he was Rudolph. I was beginning to regret accepting that date and revisiting my high school crush. Lacking any customers, I returned to my latest Christmas card, examining it for clues. Christmas dreams can last throughout the year. That could have romantic undertones. Again, I wished Nick was Rudolph. My mother slunk in as if she were Mata Hari on a secret mission. She had a tan plaid scarf wrapped around her neck and the lower part of her face. Ignore me. She removed a brown mitten and dug in her pocket. I rolled my eyes. I'd begun to spot the signs of patrons about to drop an anonymous Christmas card into the box. My mother had one thing on her mind, and it wasn't coffee or baked goods. Who's your Christmas pen pal, Mom? Was it me? I'd sent her a card. After all, writing, embrace the challenges of the new year. Who I write to is none of your business. Mom thrust her nose in the air and dropped an envelope in the box. And then her entire demeanor shifted. Her shoulders balled up and her chin dropped to her chest. Are you coming to my boutique today? There are still plenty of boxes to sort through. You want me to continue going through your inventory? I'd fully expected her to cut me loose now that the boxes were in her shop and most had been opened. The cat, as they say, was out of the bag. I value your opinion. Mom inched toward the door, shoulders hunched. She wanted my opinion? This was unusual. My mother hardly paid heed to anyone's views but her own. I can come over after my shift here. Thank you. Mom looked as if she wanted to say something more, but then she spun around and slipped out, repositioning her scarf over the lower part of her face before scurrying down the sidewalk. I dug in the Christmas card drop box, looking for the bright red envelope I'd seen my mother deliver, expecting it to be addressed to Prancer. When I found her card, the name she directed it to surprised me. Father Christmas. Who? I asked of the empty coffee counter section of the cafe. Was Father Christmas my father? My grandfather? Some other man? Someone who was privy to the comings and goings at the Sleigh Café? Was that why she tried to drop off her card incognito? I vowed to keep a close eye on Father Christmas's envelope to see who picked it up. But who was I kidding? I hadn't seen Rudolph pick up my holiday dispatches. How was I supposed to catch Father Christmas? I tacked more envelopes on the bulletin board, snapped a photo with my phone, and then posted the picture on social media, dutifully tagging the Sleigh Café's account. Holly had been great about sharing my post on the cafe's social media pages. My cousin Joy popped in and ordered something other than a pumpkin spice latte, for which I was glad. I'd made at least 100 of the seasonal drink this week and had eaten more than my share of Nick's pumpkin tarts. Her order of a peppermint latte was a nice change of pace. While my back was turned, Joy stuck a Christmas card into the box by the cash register. Her movements weren't smooth, as if she was nervous about the drop-off. She rattled the box even though I'd just emptied it. And then she was quiet, pacing the length of the pastry case. Earlier in the week, I'd written her a card encouraging her to pursue new things in the new year. Was the card for me? Or had Joy, like my mother, taken the idea of card giving and applied it to someone else? While I made her drink, Joy continued to pace. And that wasn't like my cousin. Are you okay? I finished making her beverage and reached for a lid. Can I interest you in a cake pop or a pecan tart? No, she stopped pacing and thrust her hands in her jacket pockets. I'm just wondering if I made a mistake. With the Christmas card? I took her drink to the cash register, gesturing toward the card collection box. I could give hers back if need be. No, she tugged her wallet from her pocket and took out cash to pay. I applied for a college program to earn my teaching degree. Joy, that's fabulous. I processed her payment and then handed over her drink. That doesn't sound like a mistake. It sounds awesome. I wished I had her courage and decisiveness. Do you really think it's the right thing? She sipped her drink. I feel like 27 is too young for a second act and too old for college. But I'm not happy working part-time at the preschool. It's just, I don't know what the future will bring. But you'll find your way, Joy. Because you're taking action. Which only made it clearer to me that by clinging to my identity as a dancer I wasn't taking any action at all. But who was I if not a dancer? I vowed then and there to stop being wishy-washy. I was going to retire from the stage. And I was going to take my time finding a new focus for my life. Nick came out of the kitchen, carrying a tray of delicious-smelling banana nut bread, sliced and ready to be sold. Every time I looked at him, I found him more attractive, even if he was wearing his regular work uniform of blue jeans, his pristine chef's jacket, and his blue knit cap. Even if he had a blue ink smudge on one of his fingers and dark circles under his eyes. That smells so good. I eyed the aromatic loaf, which he'd sliced evenly, suddenly hungry. Do you ever do a return on investment baking analysis? He followed the direction of my gaze. You mean, do I know how much profit will be made on every loaf of banana nut bread? Yes. I moved closer as he slid the serving tray into the pastry case. Nick took a square of serving paper and selected a slice of his banana nut bread. He handed it to me. Mom always calculates shrinkage into the profit margin because she knows sometimes the person working just needs to sample the goods. Thank heavens for Holly's business sense. I took the slice from him and bit into the still warm slice of bread. butter, sweetness, nuts, heaven. I stared dreamily at Nick. All that heart and handsomeness, and he could cook, too. If I knew who I was inside and where I was going in life, I'd be thrilled to date him. Not to mention, I'd be well fed while I did. I like the way you're staring at me, Nick said gruffly, giving me a look in return that seemed filled with a sultry invitation. Without thinking, I rose up on my toes and planted a brief kiss on his lips. It's good to know I'm not a drag on your bottom line. I returned to the stool behind the cash register to finish my bread. Nick remained at the pastry case, gaping at me, the same way he had this morning when I'd hugged him. I'm not making this easier on him. I gathered myself and met his shell-shocked gaze squarely. I'm sorry. When it comes to you, I'm still in the gray zone between friendship and other options. There's only one other option than friendship, he said in a husky voice. And impulsive kisses. You said it yourself. I'm not normally impulsive. All stressed out evidence to the contrary. I picked at my banana nut bread, trying not to feel boxed in because that was how I'd spent my teenage years, loving dance but feeling as if I had no other choice but to dance. And now. I gave myself a little shake. I know I'm drifting. I know things have to change. You'll land somewhere, sometime. The look in his eyes conveyed he'd like me to land in the vicinity of one Nicholas Stocking, master chef and baker. I'd like that. But I wasn't ready. Tears welled in my eyes. I opened my latest Christmas card from Rudolph without seeing the words inside. Nick came to stand next to me, settling a hand on my shoulder. Rudolph wrote to you again. His voice was as sure and steady as his touch. Christmas dreams can last throughout the year. Wise words. I sniffed, wiping at my nose instead of reaching to cover his hand on my shoulder, to hold on to him. I couldn't because it wasn't fair to do so until I decided upon a context to that touch. When you read his words, they sound like a fortune cookie fortune. He chuckled, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. As I recall, you like fortune cookie fortunes. Better than fortune cookies. I nodded. I like dreams, too. Christmas or otherwise. I was just woefully short of dreams of all types at the moment. Chapter 14. Where did you learn to paint? Nick had just returned from the hardware store with supplies to fix the wonky built-in shelves. He stood next to me at the wall behind the checkout counter, admiring my painting skill. I've done my share of community theater. I set my roller down, happy to admire the soft teal blue I painted the back wall. It reminded me of carefree mornings and sunny days ahead. I'd bought the paint using some of my cafe tip money. You pick up a thing or two when it's a shoestring production staffed by volunteers. The same applies when you work in a kitchen. You learn a lot more than you bargained for. Handy, isn't it? I beamed at him, feeling less stressed than I had this morning. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but I was enjoying bringing my vision for the store to life. Maybe renovation and design would be my new passion. And if it wasn't, then at least helping Mom was a way to pay her back for all she'd done for me. Nick moved a little closer, grinning mischievously. Are you thinking of kissing me? I chuckled, pushing him gently back. I wasn't until you mentioned it. Instead of frowning, Nick continued to grin. So, that's a happy and Christmas mountain smile? Yes. I picked up the paint roller and coated it with paint. Let's keep moving. I only have so much time before I have to open the dance studio tonight. Nick went to the shelves. I had to buy support brackets for this. It's like someone tried to rip it from the wall and then thought better of it. I rolled the last section of wall with the soft teal paint without comment. I suspected my mother to have done the tugging, perhaps out of desperation. It seemed that all members of my family were on edge this holiday season. Hey, Nick. Yeah. He wedged the tall faux fur box against the shelving unit. If you were my guidance counselor, what careers would you have me consider? Why not ask Nick? He claimed to know me better than anyone, after all. Is this a job in Christmas Mountain? Nick positioned a bracket on the top corner of the shelving unit, which seemed like it would help shore the square form. Yes. What are my skill sets? Besides kissing? I could feel his gaze upon me. I paused my rolling movement and spared that flirt a smile. Obviously. I went back to rolling. He went back to fitting the bracket in place. You're good with kids. Didn't you say Joy had applied to college to be a teacher? I let the idea float through my mind. I feel no spark of enthusiasm to be a teacher. Okay. Using a drill, he screwed the bracket in place on the side. You're good with people. What about a nursing assistant? You could work in a doctor's office. Does this involve giving shots? I set the roller down, shuddering. Nick climbed up the ladder he'd brought and attached a screw to the top of the shelving unit. You're good at mixing drinks. You could be a bartender. I'm not a night owl. I picked up a brush, dipped it in the paint, and ran it slowly down the corner of the wall. Nick rummaged in a bag for more screws. If you're good at mixing, you could be a sous chef. You're a sous chef? That didn't seem wise. The job would have its perks. Nick drove another screw into the bracket. You mean kisses? My back was turned to him so he couldn't see me grin. I was going to say free meals. But kisses could be negotiated. He sounded so certain. But he sounded certain about almost everything in the future. I put more paint on my brush. Don't you worry that our relationship will fizzle and then our friendship will be no more? Yes. I stared at him from my safe little corner. No, he'd shed his jacket. His shoulders filled out a deep green Sleigh Café t-shirt nicely. No? I wanted to run my hands over those shoulders and follow the line of his biceps down to his hands. I wanted to feel his steadying presence as he held my hands in his. I wanted to know that whatever step I took next, I wouldn't fall flat on my face, whether that step was career or relationship-wise, if only because he was by my side. Oh, I was falling, all right. Of all the changes I'm making in my life, the more we talk about it, the more convinced I am that this is right. Nick turned to face me. We like the same things. We like being with each other more than with other people. We finish each other's sentences because we know each other inside out. I know you need proof, the way you needed validation that you could make it in the dancing world by earning all those accolades and trophies. But you and I aren't going to enter a relationship competition where our feelings will win us a gold medal. At some point, Al, you have to take a leap of faith. He was right, of course, and I nodded to acknowledge his logic. If only logic had any bearing on matters of the heart. My mother entered the store, crossing her arms over her chest and approaching us with caution, as if girding herself to hear bad news. Her short brown hair had been ruffled by the wind and her lipstick was chewed off. It's looking good, isn't it? I injected a lot of good cheer in the question, a dare for my mom to see the glass half empty. Nick had learned long ago to keep his interactions with my mother to a minimum. After greeting her, he moved the ladder to the other side of the shelving unit. It looks different. Mom gave the boxes in the room a wide berth. We need more storage. Maybe. It depended upon what her final inventory would be. Mom was frowning. If I'd thought working on the store for my mother would lift her spirits, I was sorely mistaken. What's on your mind, Mom? She glanced at Nick and then toward the wall I'd just painted. This isn't what I envisioned. Just give me a few days, Mom. It'll get there. I promise. She glanced at Nick again. You haven't heard from your agent, have you, Allison? Nick dropped a screw on the floor. He glanced at me, frowning. No, my agent hasn't contacted me. Mom gave a very false-feeling smile. You should be proactive and contact him. I know how to conduct my business, Mom. I gripped the paintbrush tightly. Just a reminder. She made her exit, walking stiffly as if her negative emotions gummed up her joints. I'm not going to contact him, I said to Nick, returning to the task of painting. But the joy was gone. Nick didn't respond to my statement. Not with words anyway. He came to my side, took my paintbrush and set it down. And then he wrapped his arms around me and lowered his lips to mine. I needed to talk to Nick about the stakes of further kisses. I needed to talk to my agent about ending my dancing career. I needed to be more like Nick and Tim or Carol and Joy. I needed to think about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. Instead, I was instructing adorable little ballerinas on the importance of arms arching delicately overhead in fifth position. I demonstrated how the arms should look for what had to be the 10th time that hour. And instead of being cranky, I was smiling at the toddler girls. But Miss Allie, my arms are tired. Pretty little Sedina let her arms flop to her sides. But Miss Allie, Miss Eve told us to reach as high as we can. Delicate little Sarah held her arms straight up, as if signaling a touchdown. But Miss Allie, my arms don't make a circle. They have corners. Timid little Jasmine held her arms up in the shape of a diamond. All right. All right. I want everyone to shake their arms out like this. I extended my arms toward my knees and shook them like an elephant's trunk. The class giggled and tried to mimic me. Now shake your arms this way. I moved my arms parallel to the floor, hands toward them, and shook them the same way. The little darlings shook their arms toward me, hopping up and down with excitement. And now, shake your arms over your head. I lifted my arms into a very rough fifth position above me and shook them some more. This was working better than a game of Simon Says. The ballerinas in training had their arms in the air. Now, stop and hold those arms up in fifth position. I stopped moving my arms and held fifth position with fluid grace. A few of my students managed to do the same. The others. They wouldn't achieve the position this week. I'd let Eve worry about their refinements for the Christmas extravaganza. And rest. I brought my arms down to first position and waited for them to do the same. The little dears turned serious. Heels together. Toes apart. They'd mastered first position and loved it. Ladies, it's been a pleasure teaching you this week. I curtsied. They curtsied in return. Class dismissed. 3 ballerinas rushed up to hug my legs. We love you, Miss Allie, they chorused. It was nice to have something in my life that was as straightforward as teaching little girls how to dance. Nick entered the classroom, dwarfing the little girls in their various shades of pink. He wore a jacket, but there were traces of teal paint on his green t-shirt. Marks laughed when he'd ended this afternoon's kiss too soon, and I'd reached for a handful of soft cotton with a paint-stained hand for seconds. Hey, I have news. Noelle had her baby Anne. Mommy had twins. Ivy darted around Nick and cut her uncle off. She wore her black leotard and tights. Her strawberry blonde hair was in a listing bun on top of her head, signs of Nick's work, no doubt. Joseph and Gabriel are here. But when? Are Holly and Eve back already? I was more than a bit confused. Ivy scampered off to tell the friends in her class the baby update. No, Nick smiled ruefully, as if reluctant to break bad news. Eve had the twins in Denver, but the boys are 6 weeks early and in intensive care. But they're all right? I was suddenly concerned. Why aren't you glowing with happiness? The twins are good, all things considered. But the doctors aren't sure when the babies will be stable enough to come home. Nick took my hands. It might be Christmas. It might be New Year's. It might be latter. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. The import of his words and his hands encircling mine sank in. Is no one coming home before that? Not even Holly? Nick shook his head. I don't want to impose, but you need me at the Sleigh Café. And Eve needs me here. And my mother needs me at her shop. I nodded. I knew what needed to be done in the short term. And I was happy that I had an excuse to be busy this holiday season. But that solved nothing in the long term. Asterisk. Nick and I sat on a bench in Mom's boutique after dance lessons were done for the day. He'd found a bench somewhere and had it in his truck bed when he picked me up that night after dropping little Ivy off with Grams. Outside, snow fell, softly illuminated by street lights. Nick had Christmas music playing softly on his phone and had my right foot propped up on his thigh. I wore a wooden clog on my left foot. I donned a glow-in-the-dark bunny t-shirt and a white tiger striped faux fur coat over my dance clothes. I was trying to understand why my mother had purchased such things. But the merchandise she'd bought felt no better on me than when I'd looked at them in their boxes. Looks like I'm going to be staying in Christmas Mountain for a while. You can help me renovate Bowlful of Jelly next. Nick patted my ankle. I suppose. I should set goals though. Like I need to figure out who Rudolph is by Christmas. Nick sighed, turned his face toward me, and rubbed his nose. Nick. I reached over and removed his knit cap. It's time to be serious. Says the woman who looks like she raided her grandmother's closet without wanting anything to match. He made a grab for his knit cap, but I tossed it behind me. This week felt temporary until all those babies were born. I fussed with his hair. Don't judge. I'd always wanted to feel how thick and soft his hair was. News flash. It was very thick and very soft. I need a set work schedule from you for the Sleigh Café. That's easy. Monday through Friday, same hours as you've worked this week. He took my hand and placed it at the back of his neck. And then he lifted me into his lap. You see. You have problems and I have solutions. He rubbed his thumb tenderly over my lips. I like the sound of that. I leaned closer for that kiss he seemed to be teasing me with. Nick eased back. However, in return, I think you should cancel your appointment with Bixby. Bixby? Bixby who? Nick grinned. Exactly. He drew me closer. My phone chimed. I squirmed off his lap and onto the bench. I should get that. It might be urgent. What could be more urgent than you kissing me? I don't know. I just have a feeling. I grabbed my phone. It was an email from my agent. The subject read, Rockets need replacement dancer. I quickly read his missive. The Rockets need a dancer Monday. They asked for me. They're willing to pay my airfare to get me back in time. My pulse raced. They asked for me. Wow. I couldn't remember the last time that had happened. I'm happy for you. Nick stood, grabbed his cell phone and silenced Oh, holy night. He snapped up his knit cap and pulled it on his head. All this talk about retiring. I should have known you wouldn't do it. You're leaving. What? I stared up at him, still feeling the adrenaline rush of the offer. They asked for me. He walked toward the door. Come on. I'll drive you home so you can pack. What? I repeated, standing. I shed the jacket, the t-shirt, and kicked off the wooden clog. I never said I was going to take the job. You didn't have to. He reached the door and held it open. I can hear the excitement in your voice. And I know you aren't ready to hang up your dance shoes. This offer, I shoved my feet into my shoes and grabbed my coat. It doesn't change anything. Nick raised his brows. But it does. This is your life. Dancing defines you. If it didn't, you'd look around and find you something else. But you haven't. It was my life. I wish I could just as easily find something I love just as much as I used to love dance. But let me say it one more time, I don't have heart for dance anymore. I had heart for him. I loved him. I probably always had. He was everything I wanted in a soulmate and everything that called to my soul. But my suspicions had been correct. Until I found something else to fulfill me work-wise, we couldn't have a solid relationship. Nick opened his mouth as if to say something and closed it again. He turned toward the door and then turned back again. His hand reached out to stroke my hair. You have plenty of thoughts, but I know you, Al. You haven't decided anything. You've been going with the flow, with work at the cafe and covering dance classes at the studio and, with me. And maybe that should stop. Maybe if you didn't show up at the Sleigh Café tomorrow, you could spend the day sorting through your thoughts and making some decisions. What happened to being certain about your feelings for us? Because he seemed awfully insecure about it, which wasn't like Nick at all. I just heard you talk about a dance opportunity with more enthusiasm than you ever talked about having a relationship with me. Nick took me by the arm and gently drew me out the door. Try being certain in the face of that. My heart took a tumble. He had a point. But still. Nick, I can be flattered by a job offer and still turn it down. But should you? I locked the door to Mom's shop, his question echoing in my head. Should I? Why are you being like this? Because, he grabbed both sides of his knit cap and tugged it over his ears. You're going to go home and tell your mother about this offer. And she's going to railroad you into leaving tomorrow. And you'll mean well about saying you won't go, but you won't stay. You avoid arguments. You take the path of least resistance. Heck, for all I know, your agent will bully you into taking this job. You're saying I have no backbone. That was fair, but it didn't mean it hurt any less to hear. I held my head high. You're saying you never had a chance with me when dance was part of my life. The timing of events this week fell into place. I shook my finger at him. You didn't kiss me until you thought I might be ready to retire. His chin jutted out. I know you, Al. You don't know me. You don't know me at all. I marched down the sidewalk, away from Nick and his truck. Where are you going? I'll drive you home. I'll be fine on my own. I turned, walking backward through inches of snow, chest heaving because my heart was breaking. And I'll see you tomorrow at the Sleigh Café. I'll be on time for my shift, the same as I'll be on time for my shift Monday. The day the Rockets wanted me to start work. It isn't me who needs proof about love, Nick. It's you. Nick stood on the sidewalk, saying nothing. I stumbled as I turned, probably tripping over pieces of my heart. I couldn't see for the tears that suddenly filled my eyes. Because this felt like the end of everything, including our friendship. Chapter 15. I showed up for work Friday morning at the Sleigh Café, hoping Nick and I would patch things up. But the wounds of our argument were still fresh. We didn't speak. And if one of our gazes happened to collide with the others, we looked away. Thank heavens, the Sleigh Café was busy. Plenty of customers admitted to taking a day off to shop. The stores in town were opening early again today and the air buzzed with the excitement of Christmas. Or it would have if I hadn't lost my best friend and my heart half a day earlier. I could barely mount the energy to post Christmas cards, much less write one to Rudolph. Grams showed up to help after dropping Ivy off at school. Nick called me in, she explained while donning a brown Sleigh Café apron. His grandmother took one look at my face before giving me a big hug. Did you two fight? We're taking a break, I said in a neutral voice, aware that the cafe was filled with customers. Pshaw. Grams released me and filled a cup of coffee for Kevin O'Malley. You two never fight. I dumped a green tea bag in hot water for his wife Lexi, not supporting or denying her theory. Now Kevin and Lexi, Grams handed Kevin his coffee. They used to fight all the time while they were courting. No offense to the now happy couple. Kevin grinned. None taken. It wasn't fighting so much as Kevin not talking to me about the important stuff. Lexi ran a hand over her baby bump, gazing adoringly at her husband. I handed her the tea, ready for a change of topic. Are you singing with the other girls at the Christmas extravaganza, Lexi? With Carol, Joy, and the rest. Yes. Lexi took over tea bag dipping duty. I'm here this weekend for rehearsal. I look forward to seeing Mrs. King's girls perform again. I meant it. Those women may have been a year behind me in school, but they were a part of my hometown holiday memories. The newlyweds headed toward the door. See? Grams pushed her glasses up her nose. Don't look so glum. You can work this out. Nick is your best friend. Although I always thought that was just a stepping stone to something more, if you gave the poor boy a chance. Oh, I gave him a chance all right. I wanted to tell Grams that Nick started it. He got me thinking about kisses over friendship. He'd made me realize I loved him and wanted to be with him always. And then just when I started letting down my guard, he revealed his worst fear. Well, I had news for Nick. I had fears about us first. I rang up Nina Robbins' order for a pumpkin spice latte. She had a bag of red and green yarn from Nana Knits. As I gave her change back, I noticed my father lurking behind her, trying to drop off a Christmas card without me seeing. Who's that card for? I demanded, drawing the attention of everyone in the cafe. You're not supposed to ask. Cheeks ready, Dad shoved it in the box. And because I was in a mood, I pulled out his card before he had a chance to escape. I glanced at who it was addressed to and ran after him. Grams, I'm going on break. I darted out the door into the cold in my t-shirt, apron, and blue jeans. Dad! He stopped on the sidewalk and slowly turned around. Cards are private, Allie. But, I glanced down at his. It was addressed to Mama Christmas. I looked at my father. Are you Father Christmas? Are you exchanging cards with Mom? Dad jutted his jaw. And what if I was? We're married. But, I shook my head, shuddering from the cold. You don't really talk to each other. Or seem to like each other that much. I love your mother, Dad said gruffly, walking back to me. I know that looking from the outside, we have an unorthodox relationship. Dad. That was being generous. But we love each other. He took the Christmas card from me. We always have. And we knew coming into our marriage that things would never be easy between us. We expected to disagree. But we also promised each other to work things out. And do you know why? I didn't and said so. Because loving someone means being there for them, through their fears and insecurities, through their laughter and happy tears. He handed the card back to me. We've been sending each other holiday cards through the Sleigh Café since the program took off a few years ago. And do you know what? I shook my head. In these small pieces of paper, I can see the woman who stole my heart all those years ago. And I think that she can see me, the man she gave up everything for. He heaved a sigh. So please, don't make a fuss about this. It's one small bridge between us, but especially this year, it's an important one. I understand. I hugged him, careful not to drop his card. All these hugs. Dad chuckled. I took a step back, toward the door. I think we're becoming a hugging family. That wouldn't be so bad, would it? He gave me a smile and a wave, and then disappeared around the corner. I went back inside, and as soon as I had a free moment, I dashed off a card to Rudolph. But I didn't put it on the bulletin board. What are you two doing in here? Friday afternoon, I stopped just inside the door to Mom's shop after my strange shift with Nick at the Sleigh Café was over, surprised to find my dad and Tim inside. And what are those boxes? It was easier to confront them than Nick. I'd spent the day with a chest tight from heartache and a neck stiff from holding my head high. I bet Nick felt the same. Neither one of us wanted to fight. But since we'd never fought before, it was difficult to navigate our way back to smoother waters. When I'd entered the boutique, the men in my family had just set down a big box on two other big boxes, each about 6 feet long, as if they contained boards of some sort. They hadn't answered my question about the boxes, which only added to my prickly mood. Is there a problem? I came over to see what was up, because Dad and Tim were still silent, which was never a good sign. It meant they were unhappy about something. And come to think of it, I was unhappy about Mom buying anything new when times were tight. I reached the stack of boxes. What are these? Tim had his blue jacket tied around his waist by his sleeves. Smirking, he tugged the ends tighter and explained nothing. Dad ran a hand over his receding hairline as he cleared his throat. Your mother thought the store needed more shelves. Maybe. The final decision about inventory is still up in the air. I peered at the photo on the top of the top box. But these are cheap bookshelves. Particle board, like the ones students put up in their college dorms. In no way did they say, I belong in a boutique displaying irresistible items. In no way did they say, I am a high-end, beachy display case. You didn't go to college, Allie, Tim said mulishly, still clinging to the cuffs of his jacket sleeves. I assumed my baby brother was annoyed since he was here instead of at home live streaming his video game play and earning more money than I'd make in a week at the Sleigh Café. I had no sympathy for him. I flicked my finger against his shoulder. Hey, kid. I lived in a dorm room on the campus of the Arts Academy. I've seen stuff like this before. I've also seen them go into the dumpster at the end of the year. I crossed my arms and gave them both a disapproving stare. I'm sure these were affordable, but they need to go back to wherever they came from. Tim scowled. But Mom said, take them back. I pointed toward the door, nerves knotting inside my chest like badly tied Christmas bows. There had to be other ways of displaying Mom's wares, not that I could think of any at the moment. Now, Allie. Your mother harped on me all morning to get them. Dad rolled his neck to one side, popping it, before raising his head and rolling his shoulders up and down. We'll take the shelves back. But you're going to tell her. I nodded without hesitation and immediately felt better. Fair enough, Father Christmas. So much for my parents being pen pals enhancing their relationship. Really? Tim tugged his coat sleeves outward until his jacket wrapped tight around his waist. Whose store is this anyway? Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Dad bent his knees and grabbed one end of the shelving box, nodding to my brother to pick up the other end. They carried the box back out to Dad's SUV. I glanced around the maze of boxes in the store, my brother's words echoing in my head. Whose store is this anyway? It was my mother's store. I was just helping her. But if that was true, if I felt no ownership, why had I been so offended by the cheap shelving units? Because they didn't fit Mom's vision. Because I was making the hard calls for her. I crossed my arms, hugging myself and those excuses tightly to my chest. I wanted the store to fit my vision. While Dad and Tim returned for another shelving unit, I drifted through the cartons of merchandise. Yesterday, I'd shoved boxes aside that had stock I didn't think would sell. Someone had since rummaged through them, leaving samples laying across the cardboard flaps, those glow-in-the-dark bunny t-shirts, the faux fur coats, a box of false eyelashes, another of cheap bangles. Not only had someone gone through the merch, but the shipping manifest for each box was gone. I had a pretty good idea who that someone was. I went next door in search of my mother, waiting for her to ring up a customer and bid them farewell before I broached the subject that would surely cause her upset, her choice in inventory. Mama dearest. That's not funny. Mom sifted through cash register receipts, head bent. Her sweater set today was a lifeless beige. Her short hair frizzed at the back of her crown. I thought you were letting me help you achieve your dream. I did not mention the shelving units I was sending back. I am, but Mom turned toward the clean item carousel and put it in motion, a pointless move since there were no customers. The motor filled the shop and made talk impossible. I came to stand next to her and stopped the carousel with a flip of a switch. I'll need your vendor contact information and those shipping receipts, please. Mom stood as if frozen in place, one hand in midair as if she considered blocking me from pausing the carousel. You asked me to help. I gently took Mom by the shoulders and turned her to face me squarely. This is what you want, isn't it? Had I thought she hadn't changed in 5 years? I was wrong. She seemed smaller than before. Meeker. Not nearly as put together. A string hung from the hem of her beige sweater. One leg of her blue jeans was wrinkled, as if she'd only ironed one leg. With a sudden, defeated cry, Mom sank to the floor. Mom. I got down on my knees before her. What's wrong? A dozen deadly diseases crossed my mind. Are you okay? How can I help? Do you need a doctor? Her gaze seemed vacant. Her features pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but all that came out was, Is it cancer? I whispered, because wasn't that every child's worst nightmare? Cancer? No. Some of the usual fire returned to my mother's eyes. It's just me. I'm so disappointed in myself. I used to be a woman people respected. First, when I made the US skeleton team. And then when you became a successful dancer. It's okay, Mom, I said with strained patience. If it's any consolation, you still scare the pants off Dad and Tim. It's not exactly respect, but you don't respect me. My mother drew a shaky breath, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. I love you, Mom, I said carefully. And I have respect for you. She gave a wry laugh. That sounds like conditional respect. Nick was right. I'd spent years avoiding conflict with my mother. But somehow I knew that if I didn't stand up to her here and now, I wouldn't be able to move on with my life or win Nick's heart. I drew a deep, fortifying breath for the hard conversation ahead of me. Respect isn't a blanket that covers all things. I respect how hard you worked and how dedicated you were in your sport when you were younger. You set a good example for me. And probably for Tim, too. I knew it. You think I pushed you too hard. A tear spilled down my mother's cheek. I wiped it away. I didn't say that. You made my dreams possible. I have the utmost respect for that. I wasn't sure what else to say without hurting her feelings any further. Mom choked on what sounded like a sob. I want to be more than the woman who almost made it to the Olympic team. I want to be more than the wife of Allie Jameson, who owns December Dry Cleaners. I want to be more than the mother of Allie Jameson, dancer on Broadway. I want to be someone people respect for who I am today. I'm smart and capable and, her words petered out, punctuated by another choking sob. And you're in over your head because you've started something for all the wrong reasons. It was so clear to me now. Mom's features scrunched and I could practically taste the denial in the air between us before she ever uttered another word. No matter why I started the store, it's given me some of the self-validation I needed, from the town and my vendors. Mom. I can't send back anything I bought. Her voice rose. What are my vendors going to think of me if I ask them to take orders back? That you're smarter than they gave you credit for. I rubbed her arms, trying to make her see reason. Why does their opinion matter? What should matter is how you feel when you're inside your boutique. You should feel a sense of pride. You should want to buy one of everything inside because you only stock merchandise you'd love and would buy yourself. That's what I'd want if it was my store. She wiped her nose with her forearm. I did do that. Really? I wasn't going to let her get away with that statement. You'd buy faux fur coats? Wooden clogs? Bunny t-shirts that glow in the dark? I'm not saying I wouldn't wear any of those things, Mom hedged, gaze sweeping the floor behind me. Then I'll say it. I firmed up my tone. You wouldn't wear any of those things, Mom. My mother didn't deny it. She bit her lip though, clearly torn. And then she pushed back her shoulders. But they were such a good deal, Allison. And those vendors all respected me for my selections. I know they did. I wasn't going to fall into the loop of her argument. I sat back on my heels. So, what you're saying is that you decided to open a store to garner people's respect. I didn't phrase it as a question. It was a fact. But it wasn't just her pride at stake here. It was the family bank account and the roof over her head. I couldn't afford to be kind or gentle because she couldn't afford for me to be kind or gentle. Admit it, you don't have any interest in running a store. Again, not a question. You make everything I've done sound bad, Mom said in a mousy voice. It wasn't bad. It was catastrophic. Mom. You've spent thousands of dollars trying to buy the respect of people. Okay. Yes. Mom squirmed. Salespeople. People in town, like Judith Smith. The store was supposed to be my second act. She scrunched her nose. Or maybe my third act, if you count working at a dry cleaning shop. You're not just a clerk here. You own the shop with Dad. I got to my feet, consumed with worry that my mother couldn't connect the dots between her need for respect and her attempts to buy it. I think your store is your midlife crisis. I offered her a hand up. After a moment, Mom took it. I'm not having a midlife crisis. That would be beneath me. She avoided my gaze though. Haven't you ever thought of what you'd do when your dance career is over? That's a tricky question. And I fully intended to discuss my retirement with her when this topic was successfully wrapped up. Mom waved my statement aside. If you must know, I planned to fill the boutique with beautiful, fashionable things that would make people feel good, whether it was a silly bunny shirt or a soft coat to ward off the winter chill. Mom sighed. Her words became weaker and harder to catch. I thought it would be a place you'd like to run with me someday, a store we could both be proud of. She laid her palm on my cheek and I was hard-pressed to recall her ever touching me so tenderly. I thought you'd return to Christmas Mountain after having a fulfilling career. And you'd find a place to express all your metropolitan fashion sense, a place ready and waiting. A place we could both operate with pride. Her hand dropped away. And I was flabbergasted. Her idea. It wasn't horrible. But I'm my own worst enemy, I suppose, Mom went on. I shouldn't have assumed I could bring that vision to life. If only, she stared at me sharply. Ever since I left the national team, I feel as if I've been fighting for the respect I once had. For nearly 30 years? That would explain how uptight she'd been. But it made me feel extremely sad for her. I leaned my elbows on the counter, considering my next words carefully. You could have asked me if I wanted to run a boutique with you. We both know the answer to that, Mom deadpanned, as if my negative response was a given. I thought having you see the store would sway you. But I've botched everything. The store. My relationship with you. My marriage, she wrapped her arms around herself. My heart went out to her. Mom. I know this is hard to believe, but it's not too late for you and me to have a closer relationship. And it's not too late to change things between you and Dad. If they could send love notes through the Sleigh Café, they could fix their marriage. But first, I think you need to come to terms with your feelings that are wrapped up in the boutique. Judith Smith barged in carrying one of the leopard faux fur coats that had been in a box next door. I have to have this. My jaw dropped. It's so soft. It's like my dog is with me again. You know, Allie, Caesar, the dog I told you passed over the Rainbow Bridge? Mrs. Smith shed her stadium jacket, dropping it on the counter. This will need dry cleaning, Marlene. And then she thrust her short arms into the faux fur, looking blissful. How much? I expect a friend and family discount. I turned to Mom. Maybe we've both been on two different wavelengths when it comes to inventory. Like Nick and I had been on the relationship front. There are all kinds of shoppers in Christmas Mountain. And that coat, the one I'd rejected as hideous, gives Mrs. Smith joy. It does, our first customer cooed, rubbing her cheek against the ruff of the coat. A smile eased the normally hard lines in Mom's face. Does this mean you're interested in my idea, Allison? If I say yes, there will still be things that need discussing. I wanted to have a good relationship with my mother, but working together might jeopardize that. And yet, excitement built inside me at the idea of running the store. Understood, Allison. Mom nodded, then turned to Mrs. Smith. That coat is $100, Judith. And that's with the friends and family discount. Chapter 16. You have a date? Dad had asked, eyebrows raised when I'd emerged from my room to leave. Don't give her a hard time, Mom counseled, smiling benevolently at me. She looks lovely. Their comments were such a role reversal that both Tim and I gaped at our parents. She's a good girl, Lee, Mom continued. We had a nice long talk after we sold Mrs. Smith a coat and had come to an agreement about the store. And since Allison is retiring from dance, she needs to re-establish friendships here in town. What's with the coat? Tim asked me, turning up his nose at my fashion choice of a white tiger print faux fur coat. I'm modeling the merchandise, hoping to spark some sales. I held out my hand to Dad. Can I borrow your car? Did I miss something? He dug his keys from his pocket. I'll explain it to you later, Father Christmas. Mom patted his arm. We have a lot to talk about, you and I. Dad blushed. I took a few steps toward the door and then turned and came back to stand next to our Christmas tree, bending to fiddle with my rocking horse ornament at the bottom. I just want to say that I support Tim following his own path. If things don't work out, he'll know soon enough. And everyone needs to make their own decisions about their future. 3 mouths hung open. I made my way back to the door. I love you, Allie, Tim called to me. My parents echoed his sentiments. It felt like I was releasing all the angst I'd had bottled up over the years, and by my doing so, my family burden was easing as well. If only my choices had any impact on Nick's confidence in our relationship. We had the entire weekend to cool down. But I knew I was going to miss him every minute. I showed up at the Chop House wearing my little black dress, a pair of impractical black shoes, several bangles, and a chunky gold necklace. I'd applied my makeup with an expert hand and styled my hair so that it appeared to fall in effortless, touchable waves. I only wished I was meeting Nick instead of Bixby. I made my way into the bar, looking for Nick. Instead of his blue knit cap, Bixby's blonde head was immediately recognizable. I slid onto the bar stool next to his. I'm here. Hey, Allison. Bixby had a stack of what looked like insurance folios on the bar top. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me. You're late. That was odd phrasing. But maybe that's the kind of man Bixby was. Did you just get off work? I nodded toward his stack of folios. Yes and no. Bixby turned to face me, smiling in a way that I no longer found handsome. I preferred Nick's effervescent smile. Bixby's seemed calculated in comparison. What plans do you have for the future? Plans? Funny that you'd ask. I'm retiring as a professional dancer and... You're unemployed? Well, I wouldn't exactly say that. I was taking on a managerial role at the boutique with my parents as silent partners. Or at least, that was the plan if Dad approved. But before I had a chance to explain, Bixby was charging onward with what was increasingly sounding like a sales pitch. Do you have any savings plans from your time as a dancer? His gaze assessed my outfit, including my faux fur. His smile hardened. Any 401k or I.RAS? No, I laughed. I'd needed every penny to survive in New York. Your future is important, Allison. There's no reason to laugh. Bixby flipped open one of his folios. Do you know how many people reach retirement age and have no funds to pay for assisted living? Or how many people pass away without having saved a dime to pass on to their kids? But I'm 29. Not to mention I didn't have kids. You need to think about these things, Allison. Bixby circled a figure on a sheet with a pen printed with Daniel's insurance. You need to plan for your future in monthly increments. You don't know how accurate I find those words, I murmured, although not for the reasons Bixby clearly wanted me to share. Can I ask you a question? About interest rates? Or retirement strategies? Bixby graced me with that friendly smile he'd used when he'd seen me on the street a few days ago. Neither. I waved off the approaching bartender. Is this a date? No. Bixby recoiled, nearly falling over backward on his bar stool. Good. I slid off the stool and gathered my things as another woman approached Bixby, smile fading when she realized I'd been sitting with him. I wished her good luck and headed for the door. I was sure that Nick was home having a good laugh about my meeting with Bixby. He had to have known I'd been targeted for a life insurance pitch. And he couldn't tell me? I probably deserved that. I'd been glowing when he'd accosted me on the street earlier in the week, trying to rewrite a piece of my past. I knew better now. Being visible to Bixby back then wouldn't have made my teenage memories any sweeter than my time with Nick. I left the restaurant, hugging the jacket around me against the cold of falling snow. My black sandals were impractical in this weather and my feet were immediately chilled. Someone in the parking lot tooted their horn. I glanced up mid-stride and then stopped. Nick had backed his truck up to the restaurant's walkway and came to stand at the back fender. A snowman had been built in the truck bed. Frosty wore a black top hat, a red and green wool scarf, and his stick arms held a sign that read, Allie, prom? Nick fidgeted at the tailgate. He was wearing a black suit and tie beneath a black wool overcoat. He smiled at me, but only a little, as if unsure of where we stood. I imagined I looked the same. What's this? I walked toward him, heart pounding. A promposal? He nodded. I'm only about 10 years too late. This man would never cease to surprise and delight me. I laughed as I reached him. I was hoping you'd ask. I reached inside my coat pocket and handed him what I'd been carrying around all day. He stared at the red Christmas card envelope with suspicion. This is addressed to Rudolph. I nodded. We both know who Rudolph is. It was Nick. There was no other explanation. I put a finger on my nose and wiggled it. Earlier this week, you told me that you knew me better than anyone. But I think that works both ways. I took a step closer and took his hand. You are a good man, Nicholas Stocking. You love to be in the kitchen, but you also love helping people, feeding people, and making them smile. You're one of the most responsible people I've ever met. You're kind and generous and always seem to find the silver lining in a situation, even when I can't see it. I took his hand and drew it close to my heart. You have got to be the most patient man on the planet. Waiting for me to chase after my dreams couldn't have been easy. Did you rehearse this speech? He said gruffly, snow glittering on his dark brown hair. All day. I nodded. When I walked into that bar, I was hoping you'd be waiting for me instead of Bixby. Yeah, how did that go? Oh, he was smiling now. Full wattage. It went about the way you expected. You should have warned me. I suppose we'll laugh about this one day. We'll have plenty of other things to laugh about, I'm sure. He kept on smiling. It was reassuring, that smile. As for the answer to your proposal, I eased closer to him. It's yes. It's yes to being your date. And your girlfriend. And your happily ever after. He kissed me then, proving that patience had its limits. And when he was through, I smiled into those sparkling brown eyes. I've got a secret. His smile dimmed. I pulled something out of my other coat pocket, the wooden rocking horse ornament my mother and I had painted 20 years or so ago. You might not know this, but just around the corner is a path that leads to Christmas Falls, the sharing tree and the kissing bench. Local legend has it that if a couple hangs an ornament from the sharing tree and exchanges a kiss on the kissing bench, they have a pretty good shot at the forever kind of love. I like the sound of that, but he glanced down at my impractical, high-heeled sandals. You aren't exactly dressed for a walk in the snow. I frowned. That was something I hadn't contingency planned for. He grinned. Good thing I keep a pair of snow boots in the back. I glanced down at my faux fur coat. My ensemble didn't matter, but I looked at my best friend again. The only way I'm going to wear your snow boots to Christmas Falls is if you open your Christmas card. He carefully opened the envelope and then read the message I'd inscribed. Rudolph, will you marry me? Love, Prancer. Yes. His arms came around me and he lifted me off my feet. But he set me down. Are you sure? Yes. I hadn't thought a lot about it, but like running the boutique, it felt right. I was going to have to learn to trust my feelings. That's why I asked. I wanted you to know that when I look at you, I have more than kisses on my mind. I'm thinking of marriage and forever because I love you. I love you, too. Oh, that grin. It made my heart flutter. There were more kisses and more endearments exchanged. A few minutes later, after he'd parked the truck, I'd put on his snow boots, and we'd found our way to Christmas Falls, after we'd hung our unorthodox ornament on the sharing tree and snuggled together on the kissing bench, after I told him about my decision to run the boutique and we puckered up beneath the soft whoosh of falling snow, Nick held my hands in his. How did you know I was Rudolph? I took great pains to change my writing style and used a felt-tipped pen that I hid in the kitchen. I grinned, proud of myself. It was the banana nut bread. What? The day you made banana nut bread, you had a blue felt tip smudge on your finger. I saw it when you carried the banana nut bread from the kitchen. His smile grew just as big as mine. And then you kissed me. I nodded. But I was still confused about everything. And I was still afraid you'd go back to New York. Nick kissed the back of my hand. After I calmed down, I realized I would have followed you there if you'd taken that job in New York. I was that determined to make you see that we belong together. I came to the chop house tonight to apologize and tell you as much. And now, you won't need to go anywhere. I did so love this man. It's Christmas Mountain for us. It's a bowl full of jelly and the Nutcracker boutique with time made for coffee breaks spent cuddling on a bench. One of the 3 benches in our lives, not counting the one we were sitting on just then. But you owe me the truth for figuring out who Rudolph was. What do you dream about every night if not food? You dancing with me on our wedding day. Nick kissed the back of my other hand. Why do you think I took dance lessons? Epilogue. It snowed all day Christmas Day. No one in Christmas Mountain minded, least of all me. Everything in town sparkled, including my parents, who had somehow found their way back to being boisterously in love with one another. And including me. In the week since I'd proposed to Nick, and he'd accepted, I'd begun to grow into the idea of my new life. The boutique was coming together. Several suppliers had complained about taking inventory back, but they'd complained less when I'd offered to take a credit and review other items they had for sale. Nick and I had found several pieces of vintage furniture at second-hand Christmas thrift, some of which I'd had to purchase and a few pieces they'd kindly agreed to let me use in exchange for putting a price tag on them. I'd decided the Nutcracker boutique had to stock dance apparel and shoes, which had led me to order a box of dance-themed Christmas ornaments. This was Christmas Mountain, after all. We sold the holiday year-round. I was helping Nick with his plans for Bowlful of Jelly, as well as our apartment upstairs. We were planning a spring wedding. Nothing elaborate. But we wanted to use the next year to build the foundation of our lives moving forward. Holly was extending her stay in Denver, helping Noelle with her baby and supporting Eve and Isaac as they spent long days with the twins in NICU. But overall, things were looking good. Most of Nick's family planned to return to Christmas Mountain around the first of the year when the twins were released from the hospital. In the meantime, I'd agreed to take over Eve's classes and help her program in the new year. Dance was still going to be a big part of my life. And so it was that on Christmas Day Eve I stood in the wings of the community center surrounded by adorable little ballerinas, including some holding cardboard swords and waiting for their cue to take the stage. I'm so excited. Ivy hopped up and down next to me, sending her rat tail swinging into her rat troops. When is it our turn? Soon, I told her. The last act left the stage on the other side to polite applause as the MC approached the microphone to introduce the toddler girls. And now, the first of 4 ballet dances from Tiny Elf's Dance Studio, choreographed by Eve Harper and directed this evening by Allie Jameson. I ushered the tiny ballerinas out to the stage, trying to stay hidden in the wings. "Yay, Allie!" That was Nick's voice. I peeked around the curtain, finding him in the packed crowd. He sat up front next to my parents, holding a sign that read, "Rudolph loves Prancer." Nick was such a dork. And since I loved him, I wouldn't have it any other way.